Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time. Way back, into the very corseted, very stuffy, and surprisingly toxic world of the Victorian era. And when I say we, I really mean you. Because tonight, you are the protagonist. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to become the perfect Victorian lady. Spoiler alert, you deep probably hate it, and maybe not survive the first day's beauty routine. It's a world of stark contrasts, where outward piety concealed a dark obsession with appearance, and achieving the ideal look was a full-time, often painful, job. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in this London townhouse is thick with the scent of beeswax, dried lavender, and the faint, ever-present whisper of coal smoke from the fireplace. You are standing in the drawing room, a space cluttered with heavy velvet curtains, dark mahogany furniture, and shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound books you are encouraged to own, but perhaps not to read deeply. Your gaze is directed, almost forcefully, towards a large oil painting hanging above the mantelpiece. It's a portrait of your husband's late mother, a woman revered as the pinnacle of feminine grace. This, right here, is your goal, your North Star. She is the angel in the house. The woman in the portrait isn't smiling. A true lady of quality rarely does in a formal portrait. Her expression is one of serene, almost melancholic, submission. Her hair is immaculately and intricately coiled, not a single wisp out of place. Her shoulders are sloped and delicate, her hands, holding a single white lily, are pale and limp, as if incapable of any strenuous work. But it's her skin that truly captures the ideal. It is luminous, almost translucent, a canvas of pure, unblemished white. It speaks of a life lived entirely indoors, shielded from the corrupting influence of the sun and, by extension, the world of labor, politics, and intellectualism. This image is more than just an aesthetic preference, it's a moral blueprint. The term "the angel in the house" comes from a hugely popular narrative poem by Coventry Patmore, published in the mid-19th century. It described the ideal wife and woman as someone utterly devoted, pious, pure, and submissive to her husband. She was the gentle, guiding light of the home, which was seen as a sacred refuge from the harsh, industrial world outside. Your role, therefore, is not to be an individual with your own ambitions, but to be the calming, beautiful, and morally upright center of your family's universe. Your beauty is a reflection of your virtue, and your virtue is your primary function. There's a strange, almost morbid undercurrent to this ideal that we often miss. Look closer at the portrait, the paleness, the slight flush on her cheeks, the large, liquid eyes. This wasn't just about class, it was subtly intertwined with a romanticized vision of illness. The great, tragic disease of the 19th century was tuberculosis, or consumption, as it was known. And here's a rather chilling little fact: the symptoms of consumption, the ethereal thinness, the fever-bright eyes, the pale, almost glowing skin, and the delicate red flush on the cheeks were, for a time, considered the height of tragic beauty. To look fragile, to look as though you were perpetually on the verge of fainting, was to look fashionable. It was a beauty that whispered of a delicate constitution and a spirit too pure for the harsh realities of the world. Of course, you're not expected to actually contract a fatal disease for the sake of fashion, but you are expected to mimic its aesthetic. You are to become a living, breathing work of art, a testament to your husband's status and your own impeccable character. The tools to achieve this are not paint and canvas, but hollowbone, arsenic, lead, and a will of iron. As you stand there, contemplating the portrait, you feel the weight of expectation. The path to becoming this angel is not a simple one. It's a daily, hourly performance. But how real was this angel for the average woman? That's a point historians still debate. For upper and middle class women like you, the pressure was immense and very real. Their entire social standing, unmarital prospects depended on it. Yet, for the millions of women in the working classes, toiling in factories or as domestic servants, the idea of being a delicate, idle angel was a laughable fantasy. Some historians argue that the angel was a pervasive cultural prison that shaped a generation of women, while others suggest it was more of an aspirational myth, one that many women found ways to resist, redefine, or simply ignore in their day-to-day lives. You look away from the painting and catch your own reflection in a nearby ornate mirror. Your skin, with a healthy, natural tint from a brief walk in the garden, suddenly seems coarse. A wisp of hair has escaped your simple daytime bun, and it feels like a personal failure. The journey from the person you are now to the woman in that portrait is a long and arduous one. It begins not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, daily ritual of discipline and transformation. A ritual that starts tomorrow, at the crack of dawn, in the cold silence of your bedroom. The first light of dawn is barely a suggestion. A thin, grey wash against the black of the window pane. It's cold, not just a little chilly, but a deep, penetrating cold that seems to emanate from the very stone of the house. There is no central heating here. The only warmth comes from the fireplaces, which are rarely lit in bedrooms overnight for fear of fire. You can see your own breath, a small, fleeting cloud in the air. You pull the heavy wool blankets tighter around you, resisting the inevitable. This is where your day begins, not with a gentle waking, but with a shiver. Your maid, a young girl named Mary, enters the room as silently as a ghost. She carries a heavy ceramic pitcher and a matching basin. The water inside, drawn from the well or pump just an hour ago, is icy. She pours it into the basin, the splash echoing in the quiet room. This is your morning ablution. There's no luxurious hot shower, no steamy bathroom. You will sit up, peel the blankets away from your shoulders, and wash your face, neck, and hands in this frigid water. The shock is a brutal but effective alarm clock. This practice, while uncomfortable, was considered essential for a lady's complexion. Hot water was believed to be vulgar and damaging, supposedly opening up the pores to dirt and disease, and causing a ruddy, unattractive flush. Cold water, on the other hand, was thought to tighten the skin, refine the pores, and promote the desirable, pale complexion. It was a small, daily act of self-discipline, the first of many you will perform today. You pat your skin dry with a coarse linen towel, your face tingling and numb. Next to the wash basin on your dressing table is a small, porcelain pot. Inside is a simple, homemade cream, likely a mixture of lard, beeswax, and a few drops of rose water or almond oil. You smooth a tiny amount over your face and hands. Skincare, in this era, was less about nourishment and more about creating a protective barrier against the elements, the smog, the dust, the biting wind. These simple concoctions were a staple, often prepared in the home kitchen. Now you turn your attention to your hair. You sit at the dressing table, and Mary unpins the simple braid you slept in. Your hair cascades down your back, thick and long. A woman's hair was her crowning glory, a powerful symbol of her femininity and, believe it or not, her sensuality. A respectable lady would never, ever wear her hair down in public. To do so would be scandalous, an act of shocking impropriety reserved for the privacy of the boudoir. In the popular imagination, for fallen women, even within the home, it was carefully pinned up as soon as you were dressed for the day. Mary takes up a brush with boar bristles and begins the long, meticulous process of brushing your hair. 100 strokes. This wasn't just a myth, it was a common practice, believed to distribute the scalp's natural oils down the length of the hair, keeping it clean and glossy without the need for frequent washing. And that brings us to a rather fragrant little secret of the Victorian age. People didn't wash their hair very often. For a lady of your class, shampooing might be a monthly, or even less frequent. Event. The process was a huge ordeal involving harsh, my-based soaps that would strip the hair, and drying the sheer volume of hair without a hairdryer could take an entire day. So daily brushing was the primary method of hair care. As Mary brushes, you stare at your reflection in the silver-backed mirror. The room is still dim. There's only by that we dim light and perhaps a single candle. It's in this quiet, preparatory moment that the day's campaign truly begins. You assess your canvas. Are there any new freckles? Freckles were seen as a major flaw, a sign of sun exposure and thus a hint of working-class outdoor life. Is there a blemish, a spot of redness? They are not minor annoyances, they are imperfections on the masterpiece you are required to be. You might be thinking about the day ahead, a morning of receiving visitors, an afternoon of paying calls, an evening at a dinner party. At every moment, you will be observed, judged. Your posture, your complexion, your hair, the way you sip your tea, it's all part of the performance. The pressure is immense, and it is in these quiet morning hours that the foundations for that performance are laid. The debate among historians here is subtle but interesting. Was this morning routine an act of oppression or a source of private power on one hand? It's the beginning of a day spent conforming to a rigid, uncomfortable ideal imposed by society. You are literally preparing a mask to present to the world. On the other hand, for many women, the boudoir was one of the few spaces that was truly their own. This time spent at the dressing table, often with a trusted maid, was a ritual under their control. It was a space for quiet contemplation, for conversation, and for wielding the tools of beauty in a way that could bring admiration and social success. Was it a cage? Or was it a common sense? The answer, as is often the case with history, is probably a bit of both. Mary finishes the 100 strokes. Your hair feels smoother, heavier. The cold water on your skin has now been replaced by a faint warmth as your circulation returns. The day hasn't truly started. The real armor isn't on yet. But the mental preparation is complete. You have reminded yourself of the standard, embodied by that portrait downstairs. You have surveyed your own raw materials. And now, you steel yourself for the next, far more challenging step. The tools for that are waiting. And one of them, nestled in a discreet, elegant little box, whispers a promise of perfect, pearlescent skin at a terrible, hidden cost. The air in the room is still cold, but your attention is now focused on a small, beautifully decorated box on your vanity. It's not from a commercial brand, those didn't really exist in the way we know them. It's more likely from a local chemist, prescribed by a doctor, or perhaps even ordered discreetly through a ladies' magazine. The box itself is innocuous, perhaps painted with delicate florals, but inside lie thin, white, almost translucent wafers, looking a bit like communion hosts or oversized pieces of confetti. They are deceptively simple. These are balsamic wafers. You pick one up. It's light as a feather. You're supposed to eat this. The idea is to ingest a tiny, non-lethal amount of arsenic every day. Why? For your complexion. Arsenic, a potent poison, was one of the 19th century's most popular and dangerous beauty secrets. In small, controlled doses, it works by destroying red blood cells. This process, quite literally, drains the color from your skin, inducing a state of anemia that results in a fashionable, ghostly pallor. It also gives the skin a soft, almost dewy appearance and makes the eyes appear brighter and more brilliant. It promised to deliver that coveted consumptum, tragic heroine look from the inside out. You hesitate, the wafer resting on your palm. The practice was wildly popular, particularly in the Styria region of Austria, where people known as arsenic eaters consumed the poison for both cosmetic reasons and, they claimed, to improve their respiratory health in the high-altitude mountains. The trend spread across Europe and America, promoted through hushed whispers and subtle advertisements for complexion wafers or tonic pills. Dr. James P. Campbell's arsenic complexion wafers were a famous brand, brazenly sold with the promise of clearing up freckles. pimples, and giving the user a transparent, clear, and fresh complexion. Of course, everyone knew arsenic was a poison. It was the poison of choice in countless real-life murder cases and sensationalist novels. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. How could you knowingly ingest something used to kill rats and people for the sake of vanity? Part of the answer lies in the marketing and the culture of the time. These products were often sold as tonics, framing the poison as a medicinal substance that would purify the blood or strengthen the system. The dose was key. The body can build up a tolerance to arsenic, so users would start with a very small amount and gradually increase it. But the side effects were horrific, even if they didn't kill you immediately. The arsenic accumulates in your body, particularly in your hair and fingernails. It can cause nausea, stomach pains, and hair loss. Over time, it leads to nerve damage, skin lesions, and eventually, painful deaths from cancer or organ failure. If you were to ever stop taking your daily dose, the withdrawal symptoms were severe, often resulting in a sudden, dramatic decline in health and appearance, which, perversely, encouraged users to continue. You would be trapped. So, use it there, in the cold morning light, holding a tiny piece of poison. Do you take it? Your friend, Lady Cavendish, has been using them for months, and you must admit, her skin has never looked more luminous. You saw the advertisement in Godey's Lady's book, tucked discreetly between articles on household management and poetry, the pressure to be perfect, to match their portrait downstairs, is immense. A few freckles, a bit of a healthy, rosy glow from your cheeks, suddenly feel like glaring, rustic imperfections. This is a perfect example of the extreme hidden measures women were willing to take, while outward appearance was all about piety and naturalness. The secret reality was a flirtation with death. And here's a truly bizarre tidbit: because arsenic is so stable, it remains in the body long after death. When the bodies of suspected arsenic eaters were exhumed, sometimes years later, they were often found to be remarkably well preserved. This led to a strange, morbid folklore around the incorporate bodies of those who used the substance, sometimes even being mistaken for a sign of sainthood in a different context. The academic debate here was fascinating. Were women dupes of quack doctors and cynical advertisers? Or were they active participants making a calculated risk? Some historians argue that women were victims of a deeply misogynistic society that valued their appearance over their health, leaving them vulnerable to such dangerous fads. They lacked the scientific literacy to understand the true risks. Others, however, argue for a more nuanced view. They suggest that women, who were barred from most forms of public power, used beauty as a genuine to love agency. In a world where a good marriage was their only path to security, achieving the right look was a high-stakes game. Taking arsenic wasn't a sign of foolishness, but a rational, if terrifying, gamble. They understood there was a risk, but the potential social reward was deemed worth it. You look at the wafer again. The promise is so tempting and flawless, pearlescent glow. The cost is hidden. A slow-burning poison that will corrupt you from within. You think of the portrait again, of the translucent, perfect skin of the angel in the house. Her perfection seems less serene now, more sinister. Was her beauty also the result of a daily dose of poison? For now, you place the wafer back in its box. Perhaps not today. There are other ways, other tools at your disposal that feel less like a final bargain. The most formidable of these tools is hanging in your wardrobe, waiting. It is a structure of steel and bone, and it promises to reshape not just your complexion, but your very skeleton. Mary opens the doors to your large, dark wood wardrobe. The scent of cedar and lavender wafts out. Inside hang your dresses, a somber collection of deep greens, rich burgundies, and modest greys for daytime wear. But you're not looking at those yet. You're looking at what hangs on a hook beside them, an object that is both underwear and architecture. It's your corset. It doesn't look like a piece of clothing. It looks like a piece of armor, or a delicate, beautiful cage. It's constructed from stiff, coautile fabric, reinforced with channels running vertically down its length. And inside those channels are not plastic stays, but thin, flexible strips of either steel or, more traditionally, the lean what we call hollow bone. It's cool to the touch, and surprisingly heavy. You run your hand over its surface. It's elegantly made, perhaps with delicate embroidery along the top edge, but its purpose is not seduction. Its purpose is structural. It is the foundation of your entire silhouette. This is the cornerstone of Victorian fashion. Without the corset, none of the other garments will hang correctly. The ideal female form of the mid-19th century was a dramatic hourglass of full, rounded bust, a shockingly small waist, and wide, curving hips. This was not a shape that occurred in nature. It had to be engineered. The corset was the tool for that engineering. Its job was to cinch the waist in, push the breasts up and out, and smooth the torso, creating the rigid, perfect shape upon which the dress would be displayed. Mary takes it from the hook. You are standing in your chemise, a simple, long linen or cotton undersmock. You will never wear the corset against your bare skin. The chemise provides a protective layer, absorbing sweat and preventing the stiff bone garment from chafing you raw. You turn your back to Mary, raising your arms. She wraps the corset around your midsection. The front is fastened with a series of metal hooks and dies on a long, rigid piece of steel or wood that keeps the front flat and straight. You hook them yourself, from the bottom up. The metal is cold against your skin, even through the chemise. Once the front is secured, the real work begins. The back of the corset is a crisscrossing web of long, sturdy laces, threaded through dozens of tiny metal-rimmed eyelets. Mary holds the ends of the laces. This is where you have to make a choice. How tight for everyday wear? It would be snug, offering support in creating a smooth line. But for an important social event, a goal, or for a young woman trying to make a good match, the pressure was on to tight lace. This meant pulling those laces as tight as humanly possible, aiming for a waist measurement that was aspirational, and often anatomical torture. Waist sizes of 16 or 18 inches were lauded in fashion magazines, a goal to strive for. For reference, a 22-inch waist today is considered tiny. You hold onto the bedpost for support. It gives you something to brace against. A little tighter. Mary, you might whisper. It's a phrase uttered in bedrooms across the country. Mary pulls, and you feel the pressure instantly. It's not just around your waist. It's a comprehensive, full torso squeeze. The hollow bone and steel stays press into your sides. Your back. You can feel the bottom of the corset pressing down on your hips, and the top pushing your bust upwards. Let's talk about that hollow bone for a moment. It's a fashionably bizarre material. It's not actually bone. It's baleen, the flexible, keratinous plates that hang from the upper jaws of certain species of whales, which they use to filter krill from the water. It's strong yet incredibly flexible, and it can be molded with steam. It was the perfect pre-plastic material for creating structured garments. The demand for baleen to supply the corset industry was enormous, contributing significantly to the whaling trade. It's a strange thought the quest for an idealized female form in London or Paris was directly connected to the hunting of giant sea mammals in the remote corners of the ocean. The fashion of an era, powered by the slaughter of the largest creatures on Earth. The corset you're wearing is a standard model, but there were countless variations, some even more extreme. There were specialized tape corsets made more of straps than fabric, designed for maximum cinch with minimum bulk. There were corsets for riding, for pregnancy, and even sleeping corsets for young girls, designed to train their figures from an early age. The academic controversy surrounding the corset is legendary and ongoing. For decades, the mainstream view, heavily influenced by dress reformers and early feminists of the late 19th century, was that the corset was a patriarchal tool of oppression, a gilded cage that physically restricted women, damaged their health, and symbolized their constrained social status. However, More recent scholarship, particularly from fashion historians, has offered a more complex picture. They argue that to see it only as a torture device is to ignore the perspective of the women who actually wore them. For many, the corset was a source of support both literally and figuratively, a symbol of respectability and status, and a fashionable garment they chose to wear. They argue that women were active agents in this fashion, using the corset to shape their bodies to an ideal they themselves found beautiful and desirable. Was it an instrument of oppression, or an expression of identity? The debate forces us to confront our own biases about fashion, choice, and female agency. Mary has finished the first round of lacing. The corset is snug, but not yet at its full, formal tightness. She waits for your signal. You take a breath, or rather, the shallow half-breath the corset allows you. You look at yourself in the mirror. Your torso is already transformed. It's rigid, upright, and visibly smaller in the middle. The soft, natural lines of your body are gone, replaced by a firm, sculptural ideal. But it's not enough. The day demands more. You nod at Mary. It's time to pull the laces again. You give Mary a small, sharp nod, bracing your hands on the bedpost again. You exhale completely, emptying your lungs to make your torso as compressible as possible. This is a practice technique. Mary knows the cue. She takes the long laces, loops them around her hands for a bit of grip, places a foot firmly on the small of your back for leverage. A shockingly intimate, yet routine gesture and pulls. The world narrows to a single sensation: pressure. An intense, unyielding compression that seems to squeeze you from all sides. It is a powerful, deliberate, and methodical tightening. You feel the laces bite into the fabric, drawing the two halves of the corset closer together at your spine. The steel basque at the front presses hard against your sternum. The hollow bone stays, which felt merely firm before, now feel like an iron grid molding your flesh. You can't take a deep breath. It's physically impossible. Your diaphragm is restricted, unable to descend fully. Your breathing is forced high into your chest, shallow and quick. You might feel a wave of dizziness, a slight dimming at the edges of your vision as your body adjusts to the reduced oxygen intake. This was a common experience, so common that almost every well-equipped home and public place had a fainting couch ready for ladies who, overcome by tight lacing, emotion, or a stuffy room, would gracefully swoon. Fainting was almost a fashionable affectation, a sign of extreme feminine sensitivity and delicacy. The goal is to shrink your waist by several inches. If your natural waist is, say, 26 inches, you are aiming for 22, 20, or even the mythical 18. Mary ties off the laces with a series of quick, expert knots. The structure is now locked in place. It will not yield for the rest of the day. You stand up straight. Or rather, you are forced to stand up straight. The corset acts as a full torso brace, making it impossible to slouch. Your posture is instantly, unnaturally perfect. Your shoulders are thrown back. Your bust is pushed prominently forward and upward, creating a high, rounded shelf of flesh that was the desired look. It was often said that a lady's bosom should be so high that she could rest a book on it. Now let's talk about what's happening inside your body at this moment, as the corset cinches your waist. It's not just squeezing fat and muscle. It's compressing and displacing your internal organs. Your stomach is pushed upward. Your liver is squeezed. Your intestines are shifted down into the lower abdomen. This internal rearrangement had serious, long-term health consequences. Indigestion and constipation were chronic problems for many women, as the digestive system simply couldn't function properly under such compression. Here's a specific, and rather unpleasant, little-known detail: the constant pressure on the stomach and esophagus could exacerbate acid reflux. To combat this, and the general delicacy of their digestion, many Victorian women carried small, ornate silver boxes called vinaigrettes. Inside was a tiny sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar or ammonia. When feeling faint or nauseous, A lady could discreetly open the box and take a sniff to revive her senses or settle her stomach. It was a beautiful, elegant accessory designed to manage a physically miserable side effect of fashion. The medical community of the time was fiercely divided on the issue. Many doctors railed against tight lacing, publishing articles and pamphlets with terrifying diagrams showing deformed skeletons and displaced organs. They blamed corsets for everything from respiratory diseases and circulatory problems to uterine prolapse and miscarriages. They pointed to the way it weakened the back muscles, making women perpetually dependent on the corset's support. Once you started wearing one, it was very difficult to stop, as your own muscles had atrophied. On the other side, however, were doctors who defended corsetry. They argued that it provided necessary support for the delicate female frame, promoted good posture, and even had a moral benefit, believing that the physical discipline of wearing a corset encouraged self-control and modesty. The debate in medical journals was just as fierce as the one in fashion magazines. So who was right? The historical consensus today leans heavily towards the anti-corset doctors. The evidence for the negative health impacts is overwhelming. Yet, the question of why women persisted is what keeps historians engaged. It wasn't simply a matter of ignorance. The risks were widely discussed. Was the social pressure so immense that women felt they had no choice, or was the aesthetic pleasure and the sense of identity derived from achieving the fashionable silhouette so powerful that it outweighed the physical discomfort and known health risks? There is no single answer. It was a complex negotiation between desire, discipline, and distress. You turn away from the bedpost and walk, stiffly at first, towards the mirror. Your gait has changed. You can't bend at the waist, only at the hips. Your movements are more deliberate, more ladylike. You look at your reflection. The transformation is astounding. You now have the perfect, artificial hourglass figure. The pain is a dull, constant ache. The constriction is a constant reminder of the artifice. But in the mirror, you see the silhouette from the fashion plates. You see the shape that is praised in poetry and depicted in art. For a moment, the discomfort fades, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. You have successfully molded your body to the ideal. You have built the foundation. Now, it's time to build the rest of the cathedral. You stand there, encased in your hollow-bone and steel prism, breathing in short, shallow sips of air. Let's take a moment to really consider what this device is doing to you. Beyond just the surface-level discomfort, let's talk about your insides. Because right now, they are having a very bad day. Imagine your rib cage. It's a beautifully designed structure, meant to protect your vital organs while allowing for the expansion and contraction of your lungs. The corset, however, has a different plan. The relentless pressure, especially if worn from a young age, could actually deform the lower ribs, pinching them inward and permanently altering the shape of your thoracic cavity. This is not speculation. Skeletal remains of long-term corset wearers from this period show distinct evidence of this warping. Your ribs are literally being reshaped around a fashion ideal. Now let's go deeper. Your lungs, as we've established, can't fully inflate. This chronic, low-level oxygen deprivation didn't just lead to fashionable fainting spells. It could contribute to a host of other issues. Dizziness, fatigue, and headaches were common complaints. In an era where respiratory illnesses like bronchitis, pneumonia, and the dreaded tuberculosis were rampant and deadly, compromising your lung capacity was playing with fire. You were making yourself more vulnerable to the very diseases that your aesthetic was, ironically, trying to emulate. But the real drama is happening lower down, in your abdomen. Think of your organs as residents of a fairly crowded apartment building. The corset is like a crank that suddenly reduces the size of the middle floor. Everyone has to move. Your liver, a large and vital organ, gets squeezed and can be pushed into an unnatural position. There are documented medical cases from the era describing corset liver, where a deep, permanent groove was found etched into the organ surface, corresponding to the pressure of the waistline. Your stomach is shoved upwards, against your diaphragm. This is why indigestion and heartburn were your constant companions. Eating a large meal was out of the question. A lady would nibble, taking small, delicate bites, not just for propriety's sake, but because there was literally no room for more. Your intestines, meanwhile, are forced downwards, putting immense pressure on the pelvic region. This is where the most severe, though less frequently discussed, medical concerns arose. Doctors of the time linked tight lacing to a frightening range of gynecological problems, including uterine prolapse, a condition where the uterus descends from its normal position. They also worried, with good reason, about the impact on pregnancy and childbirth, fearing that the long-term compression could deform the pelvis and complicate delivery. And what about your muscles? You might think that wearing a tight, supportive garment would give you great posture. In the short term, yes. But over the long term, it's a disaster. Your own core muscles, the ones in your abdomen and back that are meant to hold you upright, are being made redundant. The corset is doing all the work for them, so they atrophy. They waste away from lack of use. This created a cycle of dependency. A woman who had worn a corset for years might find it physically impossible to go without one. If she tried, she would be plagued by severe back pain and a feeling of collapse. As her own body was no longer strong enough to support itself, she was, in a very real sense, fused with her underwear. Here's a bizarre, and slightly gross, little factoid that illustrates the public's morbid fascination with this. In the late 19th century, a Parisian doctor named Ludovico Followell conducted a series of experiments using the brand new technology of X-rays. He had women wear their corsets inside the X-ray machine to photograph, for the first time, what was actually happening to their skeletons and organs in real time. He published these images, and they caused a sensation. For the first time, people could see the invisible violence that fashion was inflicting. These ghostly images of pinched ribs and squashed organs became powerful propaganda for the dress reform movement. The academic debate here focuses on the gap between medical knowledge and public practice. Historians are still trying to understand why these dire medical warnings were so widely ignored for so long. One school of thought suggests that the medical profession, being entirely male-dominated, lacked the authority to dictate women's choices in the feminine sphere of fashion. Their warnings were dismissed as alarmist or as an unwanted intrusion into the private lives of women. Another perspective argues that the perceived social benefits of corsetry, respectability, beauty, marital prospects were simply more immediate and tangible to women than the long-term, invisible health risks. It's the classic human struggle of prioritizing short-term gain over long-term well-being. A third view points out that many of the symptoms, like indigestion or back pain, were simply accepted as a normal part of the female experience, not necessarily linked directly to the corset in every woman's mind. It was just what it was like to be a woman. You, standing in your bedroom, are not thinking in terms of X-rays or atrophied muscles. You are thinking in terms of sensation. You feel the rigid control, the enforced stillness. You feel the dull ache in your back that you've come to accept as normal. You feel the lightheadedness that you interpret as delicacy. Your body is sending you signals of distress, but you have been conditioned, by culture, by art, by expectation, to interpret them as signs of success. You are successfully suppressing your unruly, natural body and transforming it into a refined, civilized, and beautiful object. The internal cost is high, but the external reward, you have been taught, is everything. As you stand there, feeling the intense cinch of the corset, a whisper of a rumor comes to mind. It's a scandalous, fascinating, and slightly horrifying thought, one that's passed between ladies in hushed tones over tea, or read about in sensationalist pamphlets. It's the ultimate step in the quest for the perfect waist surgical rib removal. The idea is simple and brutal. If your own rib cage is the primary obstacle preventing your waist from reaching that coveted 16-inch ideal, then why not just remove some of it? The rumor specifically targets the lower two ribs, the so-called floating ribs, which are not connected to the sternum and are therefore theoretically, more accessible for removal. By taking them out, a woman could supposedly achieve a degree of waist cinching that was otherwise impossible. A permanent alteration to her very skeleton for the sake of fashion. Did it actually happen? This is one of the most persistent and debated myths of the Victorian era. It pops up frequently in modern discussions about historical beauty standards. Often presented as a fact, the image is just a compelling a vain socialite, or back alley surgeon, a secret, dirty operation, all for the sake of a tiny waist. It's the logical, albeit insane, endpoint of the entire aesthetic. But when you dig into the historical record, the evidence becomes incredibly murky. For a start, surgery in the 19th century was a terrifying and life-threatening ordeal. Even with the advent of anesthesia in the 1840s, the real killer was infection. Antiseptic surgery, championed by Joseph Lister, only began to gain acceptance in the latter part of the century. Before that, a surgeon would operate in his street clothes, with unwashed hands on unsterilized instruments. The risk of dying from gangrene or sepsis after an invasive operation like rib removal would have been astronomically high. It's hard to imagine a reputable surgeon undertaking such a procedure for purely cosmetic reasons, or a woman willingly risking almost certain, agonizing death. Proponents of the theory often point to the impossibly small waists of certain performers and celebrities of the era, like the actress Valerie, whose exaggerated figure became her trademark. Skeptics, however, argue that these extreme figures were likely the result of a combination of natural predisposition, lifelong, aggressive tight-lacing from a young age, a practice known as figure training, and, very importantly, photographic trickery. Photo retouching is not a modern invention. Victorian photographers were masters at manipulating negatives and prints to slim waists, smooth skin, and create a more ideal image. What we see in a photograph is not necessarily the reality. So where did the rumor come from? It seems to have been fueled by the anti-corset campaigners and dress reformers. What better way to demonize the corset than to link it to this gruesome, surgical conclusion? It was a powerful piece of propaganda. They would point to the extreme fashion plates and say, "See, this is the madness it leads to." They are literally carving up their bodies for this. It was a way of shocking the public into seeing the dangers of their fashion choices. Here's a curious piece of the puzzle. There was a surgical procedure for rib removal during this period, but it had nothing to do with fashion. It was a treatment for tuberculosis of the ribs, a condition called Pott's disease, or for other serious thoracic conditions like ischemia. The procedure, called a thoracoplasty, was a desperate, last-ditch effort to save a patient's life. It's possible, some historians speculate, that the myth might have originated from a misunderstanding or a deliberate twisting of this medical reality. A patient undergoes rib surgery for a life-threatening illness, and the story gets retold and embellished until it becomes a tale of vanity. The academic world is still split on this, though the majority of credible fashion and medical historians today believe that surgical rib removal for cosmetic reasons is almost certainly a myth. They argue that there are no verifiable, first-hand accounts, no surgical records, no patient diaries, nothing but rumor and accusation. They place it in the same category as other persistent myths, like the idea that medieval knights had to be craned onto their horses. It's a story that feels true because it fits our preconceptions about the past. But it lacks hard evidence. A smaller group of researchers, however, keeps the question open. They argue that the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Given that such a procedure would have been secretive, scandalous, and likely performed by disreputable practitioners, it's not surprising that it would leave no official paper trail. They suggest that it might have happened, even if only in a very small number of extreme, undocumented cases. As you stand in your corset, you don't know about the future debates of historians. You only know the story. You picture a woman so dedicated to the ideal of beauty that she would allow a surgeon to cut into her back and remove a part of her own skeleton. The thought is both terrifying and, in a strange way, admirable. It speaks to a level of commitment that you, even in your tightly laced state, can barely fathom. It makes your own discomfort seem trivial in comparison. The story serves a purpose. It reinforces the extremity of the ideal. Whether true or not, the myth of the removed jib acts as a spectral benchmark, a testament to the fact that in the pursuit of Victorian beauty, no sacrifice was considered too great. It hangs in the air, a silent, cautionary tale about the razor's edge between dedication and derangement. Now that the foundation, your corseted torso, is firmly in place, it's time to build the rest of the structure. And I do mean build. You are about to put on an astonishing amount of underwear. The goal is not just modesty, it's about creating volume and shape. First, Mary helps you step into your drawers. These are not the sleek, form-fitting panties of the modern world. They are long, bifurcated garments, usually made of cotton or linen, reaching down to your knees. And here's the slightly odd part: for much of the 19th century, they were open-crotched. This means they were constructed as two separate legs joined only at the waistband, leaving the seam between the legs completely open. While it might seem strange to us, it was intensely practical, given the sheer volume of skirts and petticoats you're about to put on. Visiting the necessary room, the toilet, would have been a logistical nightmare. The open design allowed a woman to use a chamber pot or privy without having to undress completely. It was a small, hidden concession to bodily reality beneath layers of artifice. Over the drawers and chemise goes a corset cover, a simple, sleeveless cotton bodice that smooths over the top of the corset, hiding its ridges and preventing them from showing through your dress. It also provides a modest covering for the décolletage created by the corset's upward thrust. Next come the petticoats, and not just one. You will wear multiple layers. You start with a simple, unadorned petticoat, perhaps made of flannel in the winter for warmth. Then comes another, maybe with a bit of lace or embroidery at the hem, and another. Each layer adds warmth, modesty, and, most importantly, volume. The rustle of starched petticoats was a distinctly feminine sound of the era, a whisper of wealth and respectability. Having a large number of clean, white petticoats was a sign of status. It meant you had the laundry staff to maintain them. But mere layers of fabric were enough to achieve the desired silhouette, especially during the mid-century, the era of the great dome skirt. To create that massive, bell-like shape, you need an engineering marvel, the crinoline. Mary brings it over. It's not the horsehair and linen fabric that originally gave the crinoline its name. This is the later, more famous version, the cage crinoline, patented in 1856. It's a collapsible, lightweight structure made of a series of flexible steel hoops, increasing in diameter from the waist to the hem, all held together with vertical cotton tapes. It looks like a lampshade frame or a bird cage. You step into the center of it, and Mary ties the waistband securely around you. The hoops spring out, creating a perfect, enormous circle around your lower body. It's surprisingly light, a huge improvement over the 6 or 7 heavy, starched petticoats it replaced. The cage crinoline was a fashion revolution. It was one of the first fashion items to be mass-produced in factories, making it affordable for women of many different classes. A factory worker could have a crinoline just as a duchess could, though the quality and size might differ. It created this extraordinary silhouette, where a woman's waist appeared even tinier in contrast to the vast expanse of her skirt. However, living with a crinoline was a daily challenge. You had to learn to navigate the world all over again. Doorways became obstacles. Sitting down on a sofa required a specific technique of tilting the cage back as you sat, lest it fly up in your face. A sudden gust of wind could be a social catastrophe, threatening to tip your entire cage up and expose your drawers to the world. And they were a genuine fire hazard. The newspapers of the time are filled with horrifying stories of women standing too close to a fireplace, their huge, airy skirts catching a spark and turning them into a human torch in seconds. It's a chilling thought this symbol of feminine grace was also a death trap. Oscar Wilde's mother was a vocal opponent of the crinoline, calling it a dangerous and ridiculous contraption. The weirdest fact about the crinoline might be its unexpected role as a tool of social distancing. Caricaturists and social commentators of the day loved to poke fun at the sheer space a crinoline woman took up. Cartoons depicted men being pushed off sidewalks, or two ladies being unable to fit in the same room. There are even satirical articles suggesting that crinolines were a deliberate invention to keep unwanted suitors at a safe, unapproachable distance. It was an enforced personal bubble, years before the term existed. The historical debate around the crinoline is fascinating. Was it another to-love restriction, locking women inside a literal cage of fashion, or was it, paradoxically, a form of liberation? The argument for liberation is surprisingly strong, compared to the multiple, heavy, and hot petticoats they replaced. The cage crinoline was light and airy. It also freed a woman's legs from being encumbered by heavy fabric. For the first time, she could move her legs freely underneath her skirts. Some historians argue that this newfound freedom of movement, however small it seems, was a step towards greater physical emancipation for women. It was a cage, yes, but perhaps it was a cage that allowed for more movement than what came before it. You now stand fully assembled in your underpinnings. The corset holds your torso rigid. The cage crinoline creates a vast, circular void around your hips and legs. You are wearing layers of white linen and cotton, and a skeleton of steel. You are not yet dressed, but you have become a walking armature, a perfectly shaped mannequin, ready for the final, decorative layer of the dress. The sheer weight and bulk of it all is a constant physical presence. This is the unseen architecture of the Victorian lady. With the full architecture of your undergarments in place, you finally turn your attention to your face. You sit once more at your dressing table, peering into the mirror in the still modest morning light. The goal here is not to look healthy, it is to look wealthy, and in the 19th century, wealth was written on the skin. The ultimate status symbol was a complexion that was pale, smooth, and utterly untouched by the sun. This was the great social divider, ate and/or freckled skin. What we might today call a healthy glow was an immediate and vulgar signifier of being in the working class. It meant you labored outdoors in fields, on fishing docks, or simply walking to and from a factory. A lady of quality, by contrast, lived a life of leisure, spent almost entirely indoors, shielded from the browning, coarsening effects of the sun. Her pallor was a testament to her idleness. It said, "I do not toil. I do not need to." This obsession with paleness went beyond class. It was deeply intertwined with the era's ideals of femininity, purity, and fragility. A pale woman looked more delicate, more spiritual, and less robustly animal. Her white skin was a blank canvas upon which her subtle virtues could be read. It was the physical manifestation of the angel in the house, pure, serene, and sheltered from the harsh realities of the world. To preserve this pallor, you would go to great lengths to avoid the sun. When you did venture outside for a carriage ride or a gentle stroll in the park, you would be armed with a full arsenal of protective gear. You would wear long sleeves and gloves, of course, but you would also carry a parasol, a small, ornate umbrella used not for rain, but exclusively for shade. The act of gracefully holding a parasol to shield your face was a key part of a lady's deportment. And you would wear a bonnet. Bonnets of the mid-Victorian period were designed with a wide brim that projected forward, creating a tunnel of shade for the face. They effectively acted as blinders, shielding your complexion from the sun's rays and, not coincidentally, restricting your peripheral vision, forcing you to look straight ahead in a modest, demure fashion. But what if, despite all these precautions, nature insisted on giving your skin a healthy tint? Or what if you had freckles? Those dreaded sun kisses that were seen as blemishes. This is where the real artifice began. You needed to create the illusion of natural, born with it pallor. The connection between sickness and beauty is key here. As we touched on before, the romanticization of tuberculosis had a profound impact on aesthetic ideals. The disease, in its early stages, often imparted a specific look. The skin became thin and translucent, There was a low-grade fever that caused a delicate flush, and the eyes appeared large and luminous. It was a look of tragic, ethereal beauty. This consumptum chic was so influential that healthy women actively sought to replicate it. They wanted to look beautifully ill. One of the weirdest and most revealing tips for achieving this look, besides the arsenic wafers, was through diet. Ladies' magazines might advise drinking vinegar or lemon juice and avoiding rich foods. The goal was to induce a state of mild anemia and indigestion, which would naturally result in paler skin. Staying up late reading novels by candlelight was also, perversely, encouraged, as the resulting fatigue and dark circles under the eyes contributed to the desired look of languid fragility. You are essentially encouraged to cultivate a state of poor health for the sake of looking fashionably delicate. Historians often debate the psychological impact of this ideal. On one hand, it placed an extraordinary burden on women, demanding that they suppress their natural vitality and present themselves as weak and decorative objects. It was a powerful tool for reinforcing a social order where men were active and robust, and women were passive and ornamental. The ideal of Sickline's S was a way to keep women physically and mentally constrained. However, other historians argue that we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of how women experienced this. They suggest that embracing this aesthetic of fragility could also be a form of subtle rebellion. In a world that demanded so much from women in terms of domestic management and emotional labor, adopting the persona of a delicate, fainting creature could be a way to opt out of certain duties. If you were too delicate to deal with a household crisis or a demanding child, the responsibility would fall to someone else. It could be a passive-aggressive way of wielding power in a powerless position. I'm sorry, I cannot possibly deal with that. My nerves are too weak. It's a fascinatedly ambiguous performance. You look at your own face in the mirror. You see the faint pink in your cheeks, the hint of color from your own lifeblood. To the modern eye, it looks like health. To the Victorian eye, it is a flaw. It is too vibrant, too alive. It lacks the serene, almost deathly, perfection of the woman in the portrait. Your skin is a story of your vitality, but the story you are required to tell is one of beautiful, aristocratic frailty, and to tell that story, you will need to paint over the truth. The tools for that are sitting on your vanity, promising a quick and effective, if poisonous, transformation. Now comes the most dangerous part of your morning routine. Aside from perhaps that arsenic wafer you wisely decided to skip, it's time to apply your complexion enhancer. This is not makeup in the modern sense, it's a topical treatment. A lotion or a powder designed to create the perfect, marble white canvas of your face. And the star ingredient is often leave. You open a heavy, ornate porcelain pot. Inside is a thick, white cream or a finely milled powder. This is likely a product called Venetian cereus, or simply white lead. It had been used for centuries, prized for its incredible opacity. A thin layer of this stuff could cover anything: freckles, blemishes, redness, even smallpox scars, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, white, mask-like finish. It was the ultimate foundation. You take a small amount on your fingertips or on a powder puff and begin to apply it to your face, your neck, and your décolleté, anywhere that your skin will be visible. The texture is silky, almost buttery. It glides on, and the effect is immediate and dramatic. The healthy, living color of your skin disappears under a layer of brilliant, uniform white. It's like applying a coat of gesso to a canvas before painting. The problem, of course, is that you are applying a potent neurotoxin directly to your skin. Need is absorbed through the pores and builds up in the body over time. The side effects of this slow-motion poisoning were grim and well documented, even if not always heeded. Long-term use of lead-based cosmetics would damage the skin itself, causing it to dry out, wrinkle, and discolor, which ironically created the need to use more and more of the product to cover up the damage it was causing. It was a vicious cycle, but the internal damage was far worse. Lead poisoning, or plummetism, attacks the nervous system. The symptoms would start subtly: abdominal pain, constipation, fatigue. Over time, they would progress to tremors, paralysis of the hands and feet, and severe neurological damage, leading to madness and, ultimately, death. One of the most famous historical figures believed to have suffered from lead poisoning due to cosmetics was Queen Elizabeth I, whose iconic white face may have been her undoing. One of the most horrifying accounts of the effects of lead makeup comes from the story of a beautiful 18th century socialite named Maria Gunning, the Countess of Coventry. She was famous for her stunning beauty, which she enhanced with copious amounts of white lead. Her health declined dramatically, and she died in 1760 at the age of just 27. The popular belief at the time, widely reported in newspapers, was that she had been killed by white lead. The story became a cautionary tale, yet incredibly, the use of lead cosmetics persisted for another century and a half. Why would you do it? Knowing the risks, the pressure for a flawless white complexion was so intense that the long-term dangers seemed distant and abstract compared to the immediate social reward of looking beautiful. Furthermore, these products were often marketed as harmless, or their toxic ingredients were skillfully not disclosed. A lady would buy a pot of Lead's Bloom of Youth or Garoud's Oriental Cream without necessarily knowing she was purchasing a bottle of poison. Here's a bizarre, lesser-known alternative to the deadly lead powders. Some women would create their own whitening face masks at home. Recipes and household manuals and ladies' magazines suggest all sorts of strange concoctions. One popular recipe involved mixing finely ground oatmeal or rice powder with water or milk to create a paste. But others were far stranger, recommending ingredients like crushed pearls for the wealthy or, more commonly, bismuth subnitrate. Bismuth was a safer alternative to lead, but it had its own peculiar side effect. It was known to turn black when exposed to certain fumes, particularly the sulfurous smoke from coal fires or gas lighting. A lady wearing a bismuth-based face powder could be sitting at a dinner party and find her face suddenly streaked with grey or black patches, a rather embarrassing cosmetic failure. The academic discussion here often revolves around consumer protection and the history of regulation. The Victorian era was the golden age of patent medicine and quackery. There was no FDA, no regulation, no required ingredient lists. Manufacturers could put anything they wanted into a bottle, promise the world, and sell it to an unsuspecting public. The fight to have lead removed from cosmetics was a long and difficult one, part of a broader movement for public health and consumer rights that only gained real traction at the very end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Historians study this period as a case study in how commercial interests can override public safety, and how long it can take for scientific knowledge to translate into protective policy. You finish your application. You look in the mirror, and the face staring back is no longer quite your own. It's an idealized version, serene, smooth, and unwrinkled pale. The transformation is complete. You have achieved the color of aristocracy. The lead on your skin feels tight as it dries, a subtle, constant reminder of the mask you are now wearing. You don't think about the long-term consequences. You think about the drawing room you will enter later today, the admiring glances you will receive. You have hidden your true, living face under a perfect, poisonous shell. The angel in the house is one step closer to being realized. Your face is now a perfect, pale canvas, but it's a little too perfect, a little too blank. It has the flat, lifeless quality of a marble statue. To bring a hint of life back, but only a hint, you need a touch of color. This is perhaps the most delicate and high-stakes part of your makeup routine. The goal is to create the illusion of a natural flush, a faint, rosy bloom on the cheeks and lips that suggests good health and youthful innocence, while never, ever looking like you are actually wearing makeup. To be seen to be painted was the ultimate social sin for a respectable lady. Heavy, obvious makeup, rouge, lipstick, kohl eyeliner was exclusively associated with actresses, prostitutes, and fast or fallen women. It was a sign of vulgarity, deception, and moral looseness. An honest woman's beauty was supposed to be God-given, a reflection of her inner virtue, not something applied from above. So you must become a master of subterfuge. You turn to your secret stash of color. It's not in a compact or a lipstick tube. It's likely something you've made yourself or purchased discreetly from a chemist. You lean in close to the mirror, your heart beating a little faster. This requires a surgeon's steady hand. For your cheeks, you might use a product called a lip and cheek stain. These were often liquid or gel-based, designed to sink into the skin rather than sit on top of it, making them harder to detect. A very popular ingredient for these was carmine, a vibrant red pigment derived from a rather surprising source, insects. These tiny scale insects, which live on cacti in Central and South America, are harvested, dried, and crushed to produce a brilliant red dye. It's been used for centuries and is still used today in some foods and cosmetics. You would have a tiny vial of this red liquid, perhaps mixed with rose water and a little glycerin. You dip the very tip of your finger into the vial. You get the tiniest possible amount, less than a dead drip. You touch it to the apple of your cheek and then blend, 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 working quickly before it dries and stains unevenly. You buff it out until there is no discernible edge. Just a faint, believable blush that seems to be coming from within. You do the same on the other side, praying they are symmetrical. It's a nerve-wracking process. Too little, and it's pointless. Too much, and you've crossed the line into painted lady territory. For your lips, the same principle applies. A bright, glossy red lip was out of the question. You want to look like you've just spit in your lips, giving them a natural, blood-rich stain. You might use the same carmine-based stain, applying it with a fine brush and then blot it off immediately with a handkerchief. Another popular trick was to use old cane tea root. This plant root produces a reddish dye and was often infused into a footy base, like a simple pomade or wax, to create a very subtle tinted lip balm. It gave a hint of color and a slight sheen, making the lips look moist and healthy without the lacquer-like shine of a modern lipstick. Here's a bizarre and slightly desperate trick that some women used if they didn't have access to these products or were afraid of being caught with them. They would simply pinch their cheeks and bite their lips right before entering a room. It was a quick, temporary, and completely deniable way to bring a rush of blood to the surface and create that natural flush. You can almost picture it, a lady, waiting in the hall, taking a moment to give her face a few sharp pinches before the butler announces her arrival. The historical debate around this secret makeup is fascinating. It enters on the idea of female deception and social anxiety. Some historians see this as a clear example of the hypocrisy of the Victorian era. Society created an impossible standard of natural beauty and then forced women to resort to clandestine, deceptive practices to achieve it. It created a culture of anxiety, where women were constantly afraid of their artifice being discovered. You could be complimented on your lovely, natural color by a friend who was, herself, wearing the exact same secret stain. It was a shared, unspoken conspiracy. Other historians, however, see it as a form of clever resistance. In a world that tried to control every aspect of their lives, mastering the art of subtle, undetectable makeup was a skill. It was a way for women to take control of their appearance and conform to social standards on their own terms, all while operating under the radar. It was a secret game, and being good at it, being able to fool everyone, could be a source of private satisfaction and power. You were adhering to the rules, but you were also subverting them by faking the naturalness that was so highly prized. You lean back from the mirror to assess your work. Your cheeks have a faint, rosy glow. Your lips look fuller, redder, but not painted. It looks plausible. It looks like the delicate flush of an innocent young woman. You've done it. You have walked the tightrope. You have lied beautifully. Now you have to hope that the lighting at tonight's dinner party is forgiving, and that no one looks too closely. Your reputation as a virtuous, natural beauty depends on the success of this tiny, colorful deception. Your face is now a carefully constructed mask of pale perfection with a hint of natural color. But what about the flaws that even lead powder can't entirely conceal: freckles, minor blemishes, or the dreaded tan that might linger from a forgotten moment in the sun? For these, you need something stronger, something that promises not just to cover, but to cure. You turn to another set of pots and bottles on your vanity, containing the Victorian equivalent of spot treatments and skin lightening serums, and like everything else, they are often dangerously toxic. One of the most popular ingredients for these beautifying lotions was mercury, specifically, corrosive sublimate of mercury. This highly toxic compound was the active ingredient in many popular patent remedies, like Gowland's lotion, which was sold for over a century with the promise of curing all manner of skin imperfections. It worked by effectively burning off the top layer of skin, causing it to peel and reveal the new, unblemished skin underneath. It was a chemical peel in a bottle. You would apply this lotion sparingly, just to the areas you wanted to treat. It would sting, a sign that it was working. Over time, it would lighten freckles and fade blemishes. But the cost was immense. Mercury is readily absorbed through the skin, and chronic exposure leads to a horrifying list of ailments. It attacks the nervous system, causing tremors known as hatter's shakes, as hat makers used mercury in their trade, irritability, and personality changes. It caused teeth loss, gum decay, and in severe cases, insanity and death. You were literally eroding your mind and body to erase a few spots from your face. And then there was belladonna. Well, we'll talk more about its use for the eyes. It was also a common ingredient in skin lotions, derived from the deadly nightshade plant. Belladonna contains atropine, which has a paralytic effect. In a skin cream, it could help to smooth out minor wrinkles by temporarily paralyzing the tiny muscles underneath. It was an early, and much more dangerous, version of Botox. The name belladonna itself means beautiful woman in Italian, a direct reference to its long history of cosmetic use. Let's not forget the other, more natural but equally questionable treatments. If you wanted to whiten your skin or fade freckles without resorting to lead or mercury, a lady's guide might suggest creating a face wash from horseradish and buttermilk, or applying a poultice of lemon juice directly to the skin. While less systemically toxic, these highly acidic treatments would be incredibly harsh, causing irritation, redness, and sun sensitivity, likely making the problem worse in the long run. One of the most peculiar and specific skin concerns of the era was the red nose. In a society where excessive alcohol consumption was associated with moral failing, especially for women, having a naturally ruddy or red nose was a social disaster. It could lead to whispers that you were a secret drinker. To combat this, women would use special, extra-strength whitening lotions just for the nose. Some remedies even suggested applying a slice of raw potato or cucumber to the nose overnight to dry out the redness. It shows how deeply intertwined appearance was with moral judgment. A simple skin condition could be misread as a sign of a flawed character. The historical debate in this area often focuses on the intersection of science, commerce, and female anxiety. Historians look at the advertising for these products and see a masterclass in manipulation. The ads preyed on women's deepest insecurities, promising not just beauty, but social acceptance and happiness. An ad for a mercury-based lotion wouldn't say this will poison you, it would say eradicate unsightly blemishes and reclaim your youthful confidence. It was the beginning of the modern beauty industry's playbook. Some academics also explore this from the perspective of medical history. The line between cosmetic and medicinal was incredibly blurry. A woman seeking to remove a skin blemish might see herself as treating a medical complaint, not engaging in vanity. She would go to a chemist, the same place she got medicine for a cough, and ask for something to fix her skin. The chemist, who was often a self-taught practitioner and not a trained doctor, would sell her a bottle of Gowland's lotion. The transaction felt legitimate, medicalized. This context helps explain why women might trust products that seem obviously dangerous to us today. They were framed not as frivolous cosmetics, but as serious cures. You carefully dab a tiny amount of a mercury-laced lotion onto a small, persistent freckle on your cheek. You feel the familiar, sharp tingle. You tell yourself it's the price of perfection. You are engaging in a secret, dangerous war against your own skin, fighting against any evidence that you are a normal, living human being who has been touched by the sun. The lotions, the potions, the poisons, they are your weapons in this war. They promise to transform your flawed, natural self into the smooth, pale, and static ideal of the angel in the house. The damage is slow, invisible, accumulating with each daily application. But the pristine, blemish-free reflection in the mirror feels like a victory worth the risk. With your skin perfected into a pale, smooth mask, you now turn to your eyes. The ideal Victorian eye was not sharp, alert, or intelligent. It was large, dark, and luminous, possessing a quality described as liquid or melting. It was a dreamy, romantic gaze, one that suggested a deep, soulful, and perhaps slightly melancholic inner world. It was the look of a tragic heroine, perpetually on the verge of being overwhelmed by emotion. And the key to achieving this look was a single, magical, and highly poisonous drop. You pick up a small, dark blue glass bottle with an eyedropper. The label might say a drop of belladonna, or perhaps a more poetic, commercial name like celestial eye drops. Belladonna, as we know, comes from the deadly nightshade plant. The extract contains atropine and scopolamine, alkaloids that have a powerful effect on the nervous system when applied to the eye. Atropine acts as a mydriatic, meaning it blocks the receptors in the muscles of there is that are responsible for constricting the pupils. As a result, the iris relaxes completely, and the pupil dilates, or widens, dramatically. You carefully squeeze one single drop into each eye. It stings. Your vision blurs for a moment, but as the blurriness subsides, you look in the mirror and see the transformation. Your pupils, which were small pointed black just moments before, have now expanded to fill almost the entire colored part of your iris. Your eyes look enormous, dark, and incredibly deep. The effect is hypnotic, under the soft, flickering gaslight or candlelight of an evening drawing room. This would make your eyes appear to glow with a mysterious, captivating intensity. This practice was incredibly common, an open secret among fashionable women. It was the finishing touch for an evening out. But the side effects were, to put it mildly, unpleasant. The most immediate consequence is that your vision becomes extremely blurry, especially for anything up close. The pupil's job is to regulate the amount of light entering the eye and to help with focus. With your pupils permanently wide open, you can't focus properly, reading a menu, recognizing a face across the room. Even just navigating a crowded space would become a challenge. You would be living in a soft focus world, which perhaps contributed to the dreamy, slightly dazed demeanor that was so admired. The other major side effect is extreme light sensitivity. With your pupils unable to constrict, you are defenseless against bright light. A sudden flare of a gas lamp or a walk into a sunlit room would be physically painful, causing you to squint and recoil. This is one of the reasons why the darkened, heavily curtained Victorian interior was not just a decorating choice, but a practical necessity for a woman who had prepared her eyes for the evening. And the long-term risks frightening. Chronic use of belladonna could lead to an increased risk of glaucoma due to the pressure changes within the eye. It could cause systemic effects like a rapid heartbeat, dry mouth, and in some cases, hallucinations. Remember, this is a poison. The same substance that gave you beautiful, dreamy eyes could, in a slightly larger dose, kill you. Here's a particularly strange tidbit about this practice because belladonna use was so widespread. It actually created a new social anxiety. A woman with naturally large pupils might be suspected of using drops, while a woman who didn't use them might worry that her eyes looked small, beady, and unintelligent in comparison. It created a beauty arms race where an artificial standard became the expected norm. Furthermore, ophthalmologists of the time regularly used atropine for eye examinations, just as they do today. There are anecdotal accounts of fashionable ladies being secretly pleased when they had to go to the eye doctor, as it gave them a legitimate medical excuse to have beautiful, dilated pupils for the rest of the day. The historical debate here touches upon the concept of permissible artifice. Unlike rouge or lipstick, which were seen as deceptive and vulgar, belladonna drops occupied a strange grey area, because they didn't add color or create a line, but rather enhanced a natural feature. They were often considered more acceptable. It was seen less as painting your face and more as brightening your natural assets. This subtle distinction is crucial to understanding the Victorian mindset. The moral condemnation was reserved for makeup that was obvious and overtly transformative. Anything that could plausibly be passed off as natural, even if achieved through poisonous means, was often given a pass. Historians also question how much the users understood the risks. While the plant itself was known to be deadly, the diluted preparations sold by chemists were likely perceived as safe. In the same way we use highly diluted toxins in medicine today, the immediate, stunning cosmetic effect would have easily overshadowed the more abstract, long-term health concerns. It's a classic case of risk perception being skewed by desirable outcomes. You blink your newly enormous, blurry eyes. The world has softened at the edges. The candlelight on your vanity seems to have a halo around it. You feel a strange sense of detachment, as if you're viewing the world through a lens. Your gaze is now officially languid and soulful. You look less like a person and more like a character from a romantic novel. You are beautiful. You are fashionable. And you are, for all practical purposes, visually impaired for the rest of the evening. It is another sacrifice at the altar of the ideal, with your eyes now large and luminous spools of darkness. The next step is to subtly define them. The goal is not the sharp, graphic eyeliner of other eras. Again, anything that looked overtly like makeup was taboo. You are aiming for a soft, shadowy enhancement, something that makes your lashes look thicker and your eyes more deep-set, as if you are naturally blessed with dramatic features. The tools for this are not found in a department store, but are more likely homemade, cobbled together from household items. You might start with your eyebrows. The ideal Victorian brow was full, dark, and gently arched. Thin, plucked brows were not in fashion. If your own brows were sparse or light-colored, you would need to fill them in. A popular method was to use a simple burnt cork or a burnt matchstick. You would let the end cool slightly and then gently rub it over your brows, the fine black soot clinging to the hairs and skin, adding color and definition. It was a crude but effective method, and best of all, completely deniable. If questioned, you could claim it was just a smudge. For a more refined approach, you might create your own eyebrow pomade. A recipe might call for mixing soot or powdered charcoal with a bit of elderberry juice for color and some sort of grease lard or Vaseline, which became widely available in the 1870s to create a dark, waxy substance that could be carefully brushed onto the brows. Now for the eyelashes and lash line. This is where the real artistry came in. You want to darken the base of the lashes to create the illusion of thickness, without drawing a discernible line. One of the most common techniques was to use a fine, damp brush dipped in soot. Not just any soot, though. The most prized was lamp black, the fine, velvety black powder collected from the inside of oil lamp chimneys. It was pure carbon and gave a deep, rich black color. You would carefully push this pigment right into the roots of your lashes. Another option was to create a sort of primitive mascara. You might take that same lamp black or powdered charcoal and mix it with a bit of wax or pomade. You would then take a small, stiff brush, sometimes even a clean toothpick, and carefully paint this mixture onto your lashes, building up color and thickness. It would be clumpy, difficult to apply, and prone to smudging, but it could achieve the desired effect. And here's a truly strange and wonderful little fact about Victorian eye makeup. Some women used the juice of berries. Elderberries, in particular, produce a deep, dark purplish-black juice. A woman could crush a few fresh or dried berries and use the resulting stain to darken her lashes and brows. It was natural, homemade, and carried the romantic association of foraging under law. Of course, it would also be sticky and likely to attract insects if you weren't careful. But beauty has its price. The use of these homemade cosmetics is a fascinating area for historians because it's so hard to track, unlike commercial products, which leave a trail of advertisements on packaging. These domestic recipes were passed down from mother to daughter or shared between friends. Our knowledge of them comes from analyzing personal diaries, letters, and household recipe books where a recipe for a complexion brightener might be written right next to a recipe for sponge cake. It gives us a very intimate glimpse into the private worlds of women. The academic debate here often revolves around class. While wealthy women might have access to discreetly purchased, professionally made pomades and powders from French perfumers, women of the middle and lower classes were the primary users of these DIY methods. This challenges the idea that the pursuit of beauty was exclusively an upper-class preoccupation. It shows that women from a wide range of social strata were actively participating in these beauty standards, using whatever resources they had at their disposal. A factory girl might not be able to afford a corset or lip powder, but she could certainly use a burnt matchstick to darken her brows before a Sunday outing. It was a democratization of artifice. However, some historians argue that this very making do reinforces the oppressive nature of the beauty standard. The fact that women with limited means would spend their precious time and resources trying to emulate an aristocratic ideal shows how deeply pervasive and powerful that ideal was. It wasn't just about looking beautiful, it was about trying to look like you belonged to a higher class, even if it was just through the careful application of soot. You finish your work, carefully blending the charcoal with your lash line until it's just a soft shadow. You blink, your newly darkened lashes fluttering against your skin. The effect is subtle, but powerful. Your eyes, already huge and dark from the belladonna, now had a frame. They look more intense, more mysterious. You haven't drawn a single line, but you have created an illusion. It's the makeup of a spy, designed to be invisible, to enhance without being detected. You have armed your gaze, making it your most potent weapon in the silent, watchful world of the Victorian parlor. Your transformation is nearly complete. Your silhouette is sculpted. Your skin is a pale canvas. Your eyes are deep and mysterious. The final sensory touch is scent. But like everything else in your grooming ritual, the use of perfume is governed by a strict and complex set of unwritten rules. To get it wrong is to commit a major social blunder. The ideal Victorian lady did not smell perfumed. She smelled clean. The ultimate goal was to exude an aura of freshness and purity, as if you had just walked through a spring garden. Strong, heavy, or exotic scents were considered vulgar and were associated with the same fallen women who wore obvious makeup. A lady's fragrance should be a subtle whisper, not a loud announcement. You approach your dressing table, where a few small, elegant glass bottles sit. These are not complex, multi-note perfumes in the modern sense. The fashion was for simple, single-note floral scents, known as solely flores, rose, violet, lily of the valley, lavender, and jasmine were the most popular and acceptable choices. These scents were seen as pure, natural, and quintessentially feminine. An animal I see, musky, or spicy scent like patchouli or civet would have been considered shocking and overly sensual for a respectable woman, though they were often used in the more daring and risque perfumes coming out of Paris. The application of the scent was just as important as the scent itself. You would never, ever apply perfume directly to your skin. This was considered far too intimate, too personal. The scent was meant to be an accessory to your clothing, not a part of your body. The proper method was to apply a very small amount to your handkerchief. You pick up a pristine white linen handkerchief, perhaps with your monogram delicately embroidered in one corner. You unstop a small bottle of violet water, a popular and demure choice. You don't splash it on. You might apply a single drop to the corner of the handkerchief, or more likely, you would use the ground glass stopper, which has a tiny amount of fragrance clinging to it. to just touch the fabric. That's it. The scent is now on the handkerchief, which you will carry with you when you wish to be refreshed. You can delicately bring the handkerchief to your nose. As you move, a very faint, almost imperceptible trail of violet might follow you, but it's disconnected from your person. It is an aura, not a body scent. Another acceptable place for scent was on your stationery. To perfume your letters, a drop of rose water on a sheet of paper was a romantic and delicate gesture. Scented sackets of dried lavender or rose petals would also be placed in your drawers to lightly perfume your linens and undergarments. The key word is always lightly. Here's a curious and slightly sad little detail about the Victorian obsession with florals. The scent of violets became particularly fashionable and poignant because it was associated with Napoleon Bonaparte's wife, Josephine, and later, with the tragic Empress Eugenie of France. But more than that, violets have a peculiar chemical property. They contain ion-1, a compound that temporarily desensitizes the olfactory receptors. This means you can smell a violet. But a moment later, the scent seems to disappear. After a short time, your ability to smell it returns. This fleeting, elusive quality, now you smell it. Now you don't, was seen as a metaphor for modesty and demureness. The scent of violets was literally shy. The historical debate around Victorian perfumery is subtle but fascinating. It often centers on the theme of sensuality and its suppression. Some historians argue that this strict regulation of scent was part of a broader cultural effort to deodorize and sanitize the world, and specifically, the female body. By insisting on light floral scents applied to inanimate objects, society was attempting to distance women from their own natural, bodily smells, which were seen as animalistic and impure. The perfume was a way to mask and replace a woman's physical reality with a more acceptable, artificial, clean ideal. However, other historians offer a more romantic interpretation. They suggest that the Victorian approach to scent was not about suppression, but about creating a language of flowers and fragrance. A particular scent could carry a specific meaning. Rose meant love. Lily of the valley meant purity. Violet meant faithfulness. Choosing a scent was not just a matter of personal preference, it was a way of sending a subtle message. A woman could communicate her feelings or her character through the fragrance she chose for her handkerchief. In this view, perfume was not a mask, but a form of quiet, coded expression in a society that often denied women a voice. You tuck the scented handkerchief into your sleeve or a small purse. The faint aroma of violets is a final, invisible layer of your preparation. It's a scent that speaks of modesty, purity, and a touch of melancholy. It completes the sensory picture of the angel in the house. You are now fully assembled. A masterpiece of artifice, ready to be presented to the world. The hours of painful construction and poisonous application are over. The performance is about to begin. Every element, from the steel in your corset to the whisper of violet in the air, has been carefully chosen to project an image of effortless, natural, and virtuous beauty. It is, in its own way, a stunning achievement. With your face, body, and scent perfectly calibrated, we need to address the final, and perhaps most laborious, element of your appearance: your hair. It is your crowning glory, and creating the elaborate, sculptural styles of the era is a feat of engineering that makes modern hairstyling look like child's play. First, let's revisit a fundamental truth of the Victorian boudoir: you do not wash your hair often. The practice of daily or even weekly shampooing was unheard of and considered harmful. The harsh, lye-based soaps available would strip the hair of all its natural oils, leaving it dry, brittle, and difficult to manage. Furthermore, drying the sheer mass of hair that women were expected to grow, without the aid of a blow dryer, was an all-day affair. A full wash was a major undertaking, reserved for perhaps once a month. So how did you keep your hair clean in a world of coal smoke, dust, and gas lamps? The primary method was brushing. As Mary did this morning, you would brush your hair with a boar bristle brush for an extended period, at least 100 strokes, every single day. This was believed to pull the dirt and dust out of the hair while distributing the scalp's natural oils sebum down the hair shaft, acting as a natural conditioner and giving it a healthy sheen. For a deeper dry clean, you might use a hair powder. This wasn't a styling product, but a cleanser. You would part your hair into sections and dust a fine powder usually made of starch, cornmeal, or orris root into the roots. You would leave it in for a while to absorb the excess oil and odors, and then you would brush it out vigorously. This is the 19th century version of dry shampoo. The process was messy and time-consuming, but it allowed you to maintain your hair's freshness between those infrequent wet washes. Now, for the styling. The ideal hairstyle changed throughout the Victorian era, but it was almost always elaborate and required a huge amount of hair. In the early to mid-Victorian period, the fashion was for a sleek, center-parted style, with the hair smoothed down over the ears and gathered into a low bun or a complex arrangement of braids and coils at the back of the head. Think of the severe, yet intricate, styles you see in early photographs. To achieve this look, you needed hair that was smooth and glossy. To tame flyawayers and add shine, women would use pomades or bandeau lines. Bandeau line was a type of hair gel, often made at home by soaking quince seeds in water overnight, which created a mucilagous, sticky substance. It was also sometimes made with gum tragacanth. You would apply this to your hair to give it a sleek, almost shellacked appearance, holding every strand perfectly in place. Here's a bizarre and slightly off-putting hair care tip from the era for extra shine. Some household advice books recommended rinsing the hair with onion juice. Others suggested applying petroleum jelly Vaseline, or even bear grease as a pomade. The smell must have been interesting, to say the least. It's a reminder that the boundary between the kitchen, the apothecary, and the dressing table was very thin indeed. The historical debate around hair care often touches on the themes of labor and time. The sheer amount of time required to maintain and style long hair was immense. For a lady of leisure like you, this was a task delegated to your maid, a ritual that could take up a significant portion of the morning. For a working-class woman who had to be at the factory at dawn, these elaborate styles were an impossibility. Her hair would be simply unfunctionally tied back. Thus, an elaborate coiffure was an instant and very visible symbol of class and leisure. It said, "I have hours to dedicate to this, and I have someone to help me do it." Some historians also analyze hair from a symbolic perspective. In the Victorian imagination, hair was deeply connected to a woman's sexuality. Long, luxurious hair, when let down in the privacy of the bedroom, was a potent symbol of female sensuality and abandon. The complex act of pinning it up for the public eye was, therefore, a symbolic act of containing and controlling that sexuality, presenting a respectable, disciplined facade to the world. The daily ritual of putting up one's hair was a literal and metaphorical act of reining in one's wilder nature to fit societal norms. You are sitting at your vanity, your long, brushed hair cascading down your back. It's clean. Thanks to the powder and the vigorous brushing, it's now ready to be sculpted. But the sleek, simple styles of the 1852s are giving way to the more voluminous and complex fashions of the later decades. Your own hair, as long and thick as it is, will not be enough to create the towering structures that are now in vogue. You will need heat, scaffolding, and even the hair of other women to achieve the look. The real construction is about to begin. With your hair brushed and ready, Mary brings out the tools for the next stage of the operation, the hot irons. These are not the sleek, ceramic-plated, temperature-controlled devices of today. These are heavy, solid iron tongs, with two arms and rounded ends, not dissimilar in shape to a pair of curling tongs, but far more primitive and menacing. They are, in essence, instruments of controlled torture for your hair. Mary takes two sets of these irons and places their ends directly into the glowing coals of the small fireplace in your room, or into the flame of a spirit lamp. There is no thermostat, no on-off switch. The temperature is judged purely by experience and guesswork. Too cool, and they won't curl the hair. Too hot, and they will scorch it, or worse, burn it right off. The smell of hot metal fills the air, mingling with the scent of coal smoke. While the irons are heating, Mary begins to section your hair. The goal for a popular mid-to-late Victorian style is to create a cascade of tight, sausage-like ringlets, or a soft, frizzy fringe what we would call bangs over the forehead. This required heat styling. Once an iron is deemed hot enough, often tested by seeing if it sizzles when touched with a moistened finger, or by how it scorches a piece of brown paper it's pulled from the fire. It has to be quickly wiped clean of any soot before it's used on your hair. This is a crucial step. Mary takes a small section of your hair, perhaps a lock near your face that will frame your cheek. She wraps it carefully around the hot barrel of the iron, holding it for just a few seconds. A small puff of steam, or sometimes smoke, rises from your hair, carrying with it a distinct, unpleasant smell, the smell of slightly burning keratin. It's a scent that would have been very familiar in any fashionable lady's bedroom. Use it perfectly still, trusting your maid not to burn your scalp or singe your ear. She releases the tongs, and a perfectly formed, tight ringled falls. She repeats this process over and over, section by section, working her way through the parts of your hair that need to be curled. It's a slow, painstaking process. Each curl must be perfect. This fashion for frizzy, heat-styled bangs, known as frisettes, was particularly popular in the 1870s and 80s. It was a direct rebellion against the severe, sleek styles of the earlier decades, but this constant application of unregulated, intense heat was incredibly damaging. It made the hair bristle, dry, and prone to breakage. Women who frequently used curling irons often had a halo of short, broken hairs around their hairline. And here's a truly bizarre and dangerous little fact: if the styling process wasn't going well, or if a woman wanted to achieve a more natural-looking wave, there was another method. Some household manuals suggested damping the hair with a setting lotion before putting it in curling papers overnight. Some of these lotions were harmless, made of sugar water or beer. Others, however, contained flammable substances like alcohol or camphor. There are documented, horrifying accounts of women who, after using such a lotion, leaned too close to a candle or a gas lamp, only to have their hair literally burst into flames. The historical debate around this practice often centers on technology and risk. The invention and proliferation of these heated styling tools represent a new phase in the manipulation of the body. For the first time, women had the technology to dramatically alter the texture of their hair on a daily basis. Historians see this as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave women more options and more control over their appearance. They could now have curls even if their hair was naturally straight. On the other hand, it introduced a new set of dangers and a new form of labor-intensive, damaging maintenance. Some historians argue that this new technology only served to raise the bar for beauty standards, creating yet another complex and time-consuming task that women were expected to perform. The choice to have curls became an obligation to have them, if you wanted to be fashionable. It's a classic example of how a technological convenience can end up creating more work. Furthermore, the risk of burns to the hair, scalp, and hands was constant. The skill of the lady's maid was paramount. A good maid knew exactly how long to heat the irons and how long to hold them in the hair. An inexperienced or clumsy maid could cause a minor disaster. This highlights the intimate, and sometimes dangerous, relationship between a lady and her personal servant. Your beauty and your safety were literally in her hands. Mary finishes the last curl. The front of your hair is now a mass of tight ringlets and frizzy texture, a stark contrast to the long, smooth hair at the back. The acrid smell of hot tongs still hangs in the air. Your hair has been subjected to a trial by fire, forced into a shape that nature never intended. But this is still just the groundwork. Your own hair, even when curled and styled, is not enough. The truly fashionable silhouette requires more volume, more height. It requires scaffolding. It requires reds. Now that the front sections of your hair have been curled and textured by the hot irons, it's time to build the main structure of your coiffure, and for the towering, voluminous styles of the later Victorian era, your own hair simply isn't enough. You need padding. You need filler. You need what work colloquially and rather unappealingly known as rats. A rat has nothing to do with the rodent. It was a pad or roll made of hair, designed to be placed underneath your own hair to create shape and volume. Think of it as a hair donut or a foam bump, but made from actual hair. These rats could be sausage-shaped, crescent-shaped, or just amorphous lumps, depending on the desired hairstyle. Where did the hair for these rats come from? There were two main sources. The most personal, and perhaps most hygienic, method was to make them from your own collected hair. Every day, when Mary brushed your hair, she would carefully collect any loose strands from the brush. This collected hair, known as combing, would be saved in a special, often beautiful, porcelain or silver dish on your vanity called a hair receiver. It had a hole in the top where the collected strands could be poked inside. Over weeks and months, this would accumulate into a sizable mass of your own hair. This hair would then be stuffed into a fine hair net and shaped into a rat. It was the ultimate recycling program. However, if you needed more hair than you could grow and collect yourself, or if you needed it quickly, you would have to buy it. This created a massive and fascinating global trade in human hair. Tall women, particularly in rural areas of Europe like France and Germany, would grow their hair long specifically to sell it. Hair merchants would travel from village to village, buying ponytails of hair for a small sum. This peasant hair was then cleaned, processed, and sold in fashionable city shops to women like you. It's a stark reminder of the economics of beauty. Your fashionable hairstyle was made possible by the poverty of another woman hundreds of miles away. Mary takes out a few of these pre-made hair rats. They are surprisingly light. She begins to section the top and crown portions of your hair, lifting them up and away. She then places the rats directly against your scalp and pins them securely in place. They form a sort of lumpy, uneven foundation on top of your head. It looks ridiculous at this stage, like you had a small, hairy animal nesting on your crown. Then, the artistry begins. Mary takes the sections of your own hair that she lifted up and carefully drapes and smooths them over the rats, completely concealing the padding. She uses dozens of pins long, silk, metal hairpins to secure your hair over the foundation. The goal is to make it look as if this massive volume is entirely your own. It requires a deft hand to ensure the rats are completely hidden and the surface of the hair is perfectly smooth. But rats were not the only form of hair-based help. If you needed extra length for a long braid or a cascading curl down your back, you would use a switch or a fold. These were wefts of hair, essentially pre-made ponytails, that could be seamlessly integrated with your own. The color matching had to be perfect. Of course, for a grand ball, you might be wearing not only your own hair, but also several rats for volume and a switch for length. Your head would be a complex construction of your own hair, other people's hair, and countless spins. The most bizarre tidbit about this practice might be the concept of the post-tyke. This was the professional term for any kind of hairpiece, from a full wig to a tiny supplemental curl. High-end hairdressers and post-tyke URS in Paris and London were masters of this craft, creating incredibly elaborate, custom-made hairpieces. There were even stories, likely apocryphal but widely circulated, of hairpieces made from the hair of famous people, or hair taken from the heads of guillotined prisoners during the French Revolution, adding a morbid and ghoulish glamour to the trade. The academic debate around this topic often focuses on authenticity and artifice. Some historians view the use of rats and switches as the ultimate symbol of Victorian hypocrisy. It was an era that prized natural beauty, yet women went to these extreme, artificial lengths to create a look that was anything but. The hairstyle was a carefully constructed lie, a performance of abundance and vitality using dead, and often foreign, raw materials. Other scholars, particularly those in fashion studies, see it differently. They argue that this was not about deception but about artistry. The woman's head became a site for sculptural creation. They see the use of post-dyke not as cheating, but as using the available materials to achieve a desired aesthetic. Much like a painter uses different pigments or a sculptor uses an armature, in this view, the natural look was never the point. The point was to create a beautiful and fashionable object, and the skill and artistry required to blend your own hair with full species seamlessly was something to be admired, not condemned. Mary has finished uncovering the ruts. She has added a small, pre-made braided switch and coiled it elegantly at the back of your head, mingling it with your own hair. The transformation is complete. Your head now supports a towering, intricate hairstyle that has volume, height, and complexity. It's also incredibly heavy. You can feel the pull of the dozens of pins on your scalp. Any sudden movement is out of the question. You have achieved the fashionable silhouette. But you have also put your head into a beautiful, delicate, and very constricting cage. You sit perfectly still, your head feeling unnaturally heavy and balanced, like a piece of precarious sculpture. The construction is complete. The sleek side panels, the frizzy fringe, the towering padded structure on top, and the intricate coils and braids at the back. It's a masterpiece of engineering, but it's also a significant physical burden. Let's do a quick inventory of what is currently on your head. There is, of course, your own hair, which is long and substantial. There are the hair rats, made of other people's compacted hair. There might be a braided switch or a set of false curls, adding even more weight. And holding this entire precarious assembly together are dozens and dozens of long, short, heavy gauge steel hairpins. The final creation could easily add a pound or two of weight that you now have to carry around on your neck all day. The immediate sensation is one of tension. The hair has been pulled, twisted, and pinned so tightly that you can feel a constant, dull pulling sensation on your scalp. This chronic tension was a common cause of headaches for Victorian women. The nervous headache was a frequent complaint, and while often attributed to feminine hysteria or nerves, it's highly likely that many of these headaches were simply the direct result of having one's hair bound and weighted in such an extreme fashion for hours on end. Now try to move your head. You can't just turn your head quickly to look at something. Any sudden or jerky movement risks dislodging a pin, or worse, causing the entire structure to shift or tilt. You must learn to move with a slow, deliberate grace, turning your entire upper body from the waist, or rather, from the hips, since your waist doesn't bend instead of just your neck. This physical restriction contributed to the demure, controlled posture and movement that was considered so ladylike. Your hairstyle is literally dictating your body language. And the day is not over. This hairstyle has to last. It has to survive carriage rides, receiving visitors, perhaps a walk in the park, and an evening dinner party. By the end of the day, your scalp will be sore, and the headache might have intensified to a throbbing misery. But taking it all down is an ordeal in itself. At the end of the night, Mary will have to painstakingly remove every single pin, carefully uncoil the braids, and detach the false pieces. The process of letting down your hair was not a simple, romantic gesture. It was a lengthy and tedious task. And because of this, it wasn't always done every night. Here's a rather unhygienic but fascinating little secret to preserve such an elaborate hairstyle for several days. Some women would sleep on a special, toed, crescent-shaped neck rest, rather than a soft pillow. These were often made of wood or porcelain, similar to the headrests used in ancient Egypt or Japan. By resting the neck on the support, the head and the coiffure would be elevated and protected from being crushed during sleep. This meant a woman might go 2, 3, or even more days without taking her hair down. While this saved time, it created a perfect, good, and sheltered environment for some unwelcome guests' head lice. Infestations were a persistent problem, even in the wealthiest households. The combination of infrequent washing, elaborate styles that were hard to inspect, and the use of hairpieces made from unknown sources created an ideal breeding ground. To combat this, women would use fine-toothed metal combs to meticulously go through the hair, and in severe cases, apply harsh treatments made from kerosene, turpentine, or toxic mercury compounds. It's a grim reality check behind the glamorous image. The academic debate around these elaborate hairstyles often explores the intersection of beauty, pain, and identity. Was the physical discomfort the weight, the headaches, the tension a deliberate part of the experience? Some cultural theorists argue that, in a way, yes, they suggest that this kind of discipline, endured discomfort, was seen as a sign of a woman's moral fortitude and self-control. To be able to bear the corset and the weight of the hair with serene grace was a testament to her character. Pain was sublimated into virtue. Other historians, however, push back against this, arguing that we shouldn't romanticize the suffering. They contend that women were not seeking out pain, but were simply willing to tolerate it as an unavoidable side effect of achieving a look that brought them social status, admiration, and personal satisfaction. They focus on the skill and artistry involved, framing the woman and her hairdresser not as victims, but as creative agents. The debate hinges on whether you see the woman as a passive sufferer for fashion or an active creator of her own aesthetic identity, however punishing the process might be. You catch your reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at you looks regal, imposing, then perfectly fashionable. Her hair is a crown, a symbol of her status and her dedication to the ideals of beauty. You can't see the dozens of pins digging into your scalp. You can't see the padding made from a poor girl's hair. All you can see is the magnificent, finished product. You lift your chin, adjusting to the weight. The dull ache at the base of your skull is just a small price to pay. You have built your crown. Now you must wear it. You are now, finally, ready to get dressed. All the foundational work is complete. The corset has shaped your torso, the crinoline has created the voluminous skirt, and your hair is a towering, heavy masterpiece. Mary and perhaps another may bring over your dress. It's not something you can simply slip on. It's a heavy, complex garment that requires assistance to get into. You step into the dress, or it's lowered over your head, carefully navigating your elaborate hairstyle. It's made of a rich, heavy fabric like silk taffeta or merino wool, in a deep, respectable color, perhaps a dark emerald green or a somber plum. The bodice is tailored to fit perfectly over your corseted form, with long, tight sleeves. The front is fastened with a long row of tiny, fabric-covered buttons or a series of hidden hooks and eyes. It's a two-person job to get it closed. As the last hook is fastened, you are fully encased, but the defining feature of your outfit, the one that dictates your every move, is the vast, bell-shaped skirt, supported by the cage crinoline underneath. You are now occupying an enormous amount of physical space. Your skirt might be 5 or 6 feet in diameter at the hem. You are, in effect, a walking architectural statement. And this statement came with a whole new set of rules for navigation. The first challenge is simply moving. You can't just walk, you have to glide. The cage crinoline tends to sway and bounce with each step. And learning to control this movement was a key part of a lady's deportment. You have to take small, even steps to keep the cage from swinging wildly. Then there are doorways. A standard single doorway is now a puzzle to be solved. You can't walk through it head-on. You must turn sideways, gathering and compressing the flexible steel hoops of the cage with your hands, and then pass through with a graceful shuffle. It was a practiced, elegant maneuver that every crinoline woman had to master. Sitting down, as we've mentioned, is another major production. You can't just plop down on a chair. You have to approach the chair, turn, and as you lower yourself, use your hands to guide the back of the cage, tilting it upwards behind you. The furniture of the era had to adapt. You'll notice that Victorian sofas and chairs often have no arms, or very low ones, to accommodate the massive skirts. These gossip chairs or conversation settees were designed for a crinoline whirl. And then there's the wind. A sudden gust could be your worst enemy. The cage, being light and airy, could act like a sail, threatening to lift your entire skirt and expose your underpinnings to the horrified public. There are countless satirical cartoons from the period depicting exactly this scenario. A woman wrestling with her wind-blown crinoline in a moment of utter social humiliation. But the most serious danger, as we touched on before, was fire. The combination of a huge, airy cotton skirt, multiple petticoats, and the prevalence of open flames, fireplaces, candles, gas lamps was a lethal one. It's estimated that thousands of women died in crinoline-related fire accidents during the height of its fashion. The poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's wife, Fanny, tragically died after her dress caught fire in 1861. It wasn't even a crinoline, but the story highlighted the flammability of women's clothing. Newspapers would report these incidents with grim regularity, yet the fashion persisted for over a decade. One of the most bizarre facts about the crinoline era is its impact on public life and industry. Factories had to adjust their machinery to prevent women's skirts from getting caught. Conductors on omnibuses complained about a single crinoline lady taking up the space of 3 people. Churches had to consider widening the spacing between pews. It's a rare example of a single fashion item forcing society to physically re-engineer itself around it. The historical debate about the crinoline is, as we've noted, complex. Was it the ultimate symbol of female confinement, a literal cage that restricted movement and endangered lives? The arguments are strong. It was impractical, hazardous, and forced women into a state of constant, careful self-monitoring. However, the revisionist view argues for its liberating qualities. By replacing the need for multiple, heavy, and unhygienic petticoats, the cage crinoline was lighter and offered more freedom of movement for the legs. Some historians and feminists of the time even saw it in a positive light. It created a distinct personal space for a woman, a bubble that kept men at a polite distance. In a world where women's bodies were often subject to unwanted physical contact or crowding in public spaces, the crinoline could function as a kind of defensive barrier. Was it a prison? Or was it a portable fortress? The answer likely depends on the context and the woman wearing it. You stand before the long mirror, a perfect, bell-shaped silhouette. You are the epitome of mid-century fashion. You take a few experimental steps, feeling the strange, buoyant sway of the cage around your legs. You are a ship in full sail, ready to navigate the calm and potentially treacherous waters of the drawing room. Your dress is your armor. Your cage is your shield. You are a beautiful, formidable, and highly flammable creation. You've lived with the great, bell-shaped crinoline for years. You've mastered the art of navigating doorways, sitting gracefully, and avoiding open flames. But fashion, as always, is restless. By the late 1860s and into the 1870s, the perfect dome silhouette begins to change. The volume doesn't disappear, it just moves. The focus shifts from an all-around dome to the back of the dress. You are about to enter the age of the bustle. Mary helps you out of your familiar cage crinoline. In its place, she brings a new, and arguably stranger, undergarment. The first iterations of the bustle were often a modified crinoline, what was called a CRI no-let, where the hoops were only on the back half of the frame, creating a shape that was flat in the front and voluminous in the back. But this soon evolved into a dedicated bustle frame. This new contraption is a half cage of steel wires and tapes that is tied around your waist and sits entirely over your rear. It projects backwards, creating a sort of shelf upon which the fabric of your skirt will be draped. There were dozens of patented designs, some looking like lobster tails, others like complex wire baskets. They were often collapsible, with springs and hinges, so that the bustle would compress when you sat down and spring back into shape when you stood up. Over this wire frame, you might wear an additional padded bustle, a crescent-shaped cushion stuffed with horsehair or cotton, to further enhance the shape and soften the lines of the wire cage underneath. You are deliberately creating an exaggerated, almost shelf-like protuberance at the back of your body. The dress that goes over this is entirely different. The front of the skirt is now narrow, often elaborately decorated with flat pleats, swags, and frills. But all the action is in the back. An enormous amount of fabric draped, pleated, puffed, and festooned with bows and ribbons is gathered and piled on top of the bustle frame. The effect is dramatic and, to modern eyes, incredibly strange. It creates a silhouette that is almost insect-like, with a slim torso and an enormous, decorated posterior. Why this sudden shift in focus? Fashion historians have many theories. Some see it as a natural evolution, a way to create a new and exciting silhouette after the crinoline had dominated for so long. Others suggest it was a more practical alternative, as the narrower front made walking slightly easier, even if you were now carrying a large shelf on your backside. A more provocative theory connects it to the changing social and artistic mores of the time. The bustle era coincided with a period of growing aestheticism and a fascination with historical revivals. The shape was seen as a nod to 18th century fashions, like the panniers worn at the court of Marie Antoinette. It was also, arguably, a much more overtly sensual and suggestive silhouette than the demure, belle-like crinoline. By emphasizing the hips and rear, the bustle drew attention to parts of the female form that the earlier Victorian era had tried to obscure within a generalized, non-specific dome. Here's a peculiar little fact about living with the bustle: it created its own set of unique problems. While you could now fit through doorways head-on, turning around in a small space became a major hazard. The bustle shelf could act as a wrecking ball, sweeping precious porcelain figurines or teacups off tables with a single, ill-judged pivot. The satirical magazine Punch was filled with cartoons of women causing chaos in cluttered Victorian drawing rooms with their fashionable posteriors. The historical debate around the bustle often centers on its perceived absurdity and what it says about the objectification of women. To many modern observers and critics at the time, the bustle is the peak of irrational fashion. It seems to distort the female form in a way that is unnatural and even demeaning, turning the wearer into a walking display table. Dress reformers and early feminists were particularly harsh in their condemnation, seeing it as a symbol of female frivolity and subjugation. However, a more nuanced historical perspective encourages us to look at it through the eyes of the women who wore it. For them, it was not absurd, it was the height of elegance and sophistication. The skill required to drape and arrange the fabric over the bustle was immense, a true art form for dressmakers. Wearing it correctly, with the right posture slight forward till known as the Grecian bend, was a sign of high fashion and good breeding. They were not seeing an absurd shelf, they were seeing a beautiful, flowing cascade of expensive fabric, a testament to their wealth and taste. To dismiss it as merely silly is to ignore the aesthetic values and the lived reality of the period. You stand sideways to the mirror, examining your new, strange silhouette. The front of your dress lies flat against your stomach and legs. The back is an explosion of fabric and form. It feels even more restrictive than the crinoline in some ways. The weight concentrated in one area, pulling you backward. You take a step. The springy bustle structure bounces gently behind you. This is the new ideal. This is the new cage. You have traded the all-encompassing fortress of the crinoline for a more targeted, and arguably more bizarre, form of fashionable confinement. Your main ensemble is complete. A towering achievement of hair, collarbone, and fabric. But a true lady of fashion knows that the devil is in the details. The final layer of respectability and elegance comes from your accessories, and in the Victorian era, these were not mere afterthoughts. They were governed by a rigid code of etiquette, and to areas were of paramount importance: your hands and your feet. Let's start with your hands. A lady's hands were, like her face, a marker of her class. They were expected to be soft, white, and slender, free from any sign of labor. To maintain this, you would wear gloves, not just for special occasions, but almost all the time when in public. To appear outdoors without gloves was considered a state of undress, a shocking breach of etiquette akin to being barefoot. In your wardrobe, you have a collection of gloves for every occasion. For daytime wear, You have sturdy but elegant gloves made of fine kid leather, in neutral colors like tan, gray in tools, or beige. For the evening, for a ball or the opera, you have long, white gloves, reaching past the elbow, often made of the softest, thinnest kid skin, or, for a more affordable option, silk or fine cotton. These gloves would have a row of tiny, delicate pearl buttons at the wrist. Putting on a pair of tight-fitting kid gloves was a process in itself. You would use a dusting of talcum powder on your hands to help them slide in. Then, you would work each finger in carefully, smoothing the leather down. It was a slow, deliberate ritual. Gloves were so central to a lady's life that they even had their own accessories. Like glove stretchers, small wooden or ivory tools used to widen the fingers of the gloves before wearing on special silver boxes to carry as pair. The rules surrounding gloves were numerous and complex. You wore them when you arrived at a dinner party, but took them off to eat, placing them in your lap. You kept them on for dancing at a ball. A stained or torn glove was a sign of sloppiness, and a lady would always carry a spare pair in case of such an emergency. Handing someone your glove was a gesture laden with meaning, a sign of favor or intimacy. Now for your feet. Just as your hands had to look delicate and unused, your feet had to be small and dainty. A large foot was considered unfeminine and clumsy. The ideal was a tiny, narrow foot, crammed into an equally tiny and narrow shoe. Your shoes are not designed for comfort. They are designed to create an illusion. For daytime, you might wear a pair of leather boots that lace up the front or side. They have a modest, curved Lewis heel and a narrow, pointed toe. They are incredibly tight. For the evening, you would wear delicate slippers made of silk or satin, often in the same color as your dress, decorated with ribbons or a small rosette. These slippers offered virtually no support. The effect of these tight, pointed shoes was to make your foot look smaller and your arch higher. But the consequence was a lifetime of foot problems. Bunions, corns, and hammer toes were the common, painful companions of the fashionable Victorian woman, but this pain was hidden, endured silently for the sake of creating the appearance of a delicate, aristocratic foot. Here's a bizarre and fascinating tidbit related to this obsession with small feet: the rise of croquet as a popular pastime for both men and women in the mid-19th century. On the surface, it was a respectable, gentle sport, but one of its main social functions was to provide a rare, sanctioned opportunity for a lady to reveal her ankles and feet. As she bent to place her ball or swung her mallet, her skirt might lift just enough to offer a tantalizing glimpse of a well-turned ankle and a dainty, booted foot. The entire game was a theater of flirtation, played out over the display of feet. The historical debate around these accessories often revolves around the theme of fetishization and control. Some scholars argue that the intense focus on these small, non-threatening parts of the female body, the hands and feet, was a way of symbolically disarming women. By encasing the hands in tight gloves and crippling the feet in small shoes, society was rendering women physically less capable, reinforcing their status as delicate, ornamental creatures. The gloved hand could not work, the tightly shod foot could not run. Other historians, however, suggest that women themselves were active participants in this language of accessories. They used these items to communicate their status, taste, and understanding of complex social codes. Mastering the art of glove etiquette, or choosing the perfect slipper, was a way of demonstrating your social prowess. In this view, accessories were not just tools of restriction, but also tools of social navigation and performance. A perfectly gloved hand holding a fan was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of power and control within the strict confines of the drawing room. You pull on your leather gloves, working each finger into its tight sheath. You glance down at your booted feet, peeking out from beneath the hem of your dress. They ache already. Your hands are now sealed. Your feet are bound. These final touches complete your transformation. They are the punctuation marks on the long, complex sentence of your appearance, signaling your refinement, your leisure, and your complete submission to the exacting standards of your time. You are now fully assembled, a walking, breathing embodiment of upper-class Victorian femininity. Every detail, from the invisible constriction of your corset to the faint, floral scent on your handkerchief, has been carefully calibrated to project an image of natural, virtuous, and effortless grace. The key to your success is that all this artifice must remain invisible. Now let's step outside your respectable world for a moment and consider your cosmetic opposite, the painted woman. This is the woman against whom you define yourself. In the Victorian mind, society was starkly divided. There were good women, mothers, wives, daughters, the angels in the house, and there were fallen women. This latter category included actresses, dancers, and, most prominently, prostitutes. And the most visible, damning sign of a woman's fall from grace was the use of obvious, heavy makeup. Imagine seeing one of these women on the street. Her face would be a shocking sight to your carefully trained eyes. She would not have a subtle, secret blush. She would have two bright, bold circles of rouge on her cheeks, clearly sitting on top of the skin. Her lips would be coated in a greasy, bright red pomade. Her eyebrows would be dramatically darkened with a heavy hand. And most scandalous of all, her eyes would be thickly lined with kohl, a dark powder used since ancient times. Kohl was unequivocally the mark of the courtesan or the actress, a symbol of a sexuality that was for public consumption, for sale. This visible makeup was not just a matter of taste, it was a professional necessity. Actresses and dancers needed heavy, theatrical makeup to make their features visible to the audience in large, dimly lit theaters. For prostitutes, it served as an advertisement, a clear signal of their trade and availability, setting them apart from the respectable women on the street. The makeup was a uniform. The products they used were often cheaper, cruder, and even more dangerous than the ones on your own vanity. While you might use a discreet, carmine-based stain, a painted lady might use a cheap rouge made from red mercuric sulfide, also known as vermilion. It provided a brilliant red color but was, of course, highly toxic. A white face paint might be an even cheaper, harsher formulation of lead or bismuth. The contrast between your beauty routine and hers is a perfect illustration of the class and moral codes of the era. Your goal is to deny artifice, her goal is to proclaim it. Your makeup whispers, her shouts. You use poisons discreetly to mimic a natural state of aristocratic frailty. She uses poisons boldly to create a mask of professional theatricality. Here's a curious intersection of these two worlds: the theater. While actresses were firmly in the disreputable category, the plays they starred in were a major source of fashion inspiration for respectable ladies. A popular actress could launch a trend for a particular hairstyle or a style of dress. So you would have ladies of society eagerly copying the fashions they saw on stage, while simultaneously holding the actresses themselves in moral contempt. It was a strange dynamic of emulating the style while scorning the woman. This stark division between the natural face and the painted face is a subject of great interest to historians, particularly those studying gender and class. The academic debate often centers on whether this division was a tool for female empowerment or oppression. One argument is that this makeup code was a powerful tool of social control, used by the patriarchal society to keep women in their place. By associating makeup with immorality, it created a powerful deterrent against any form of overt self-adornment, forcing respectable women into a narrow and restrictive aesthetic ideal. It was a way of ensuring that a good woman's face remained a passive, controlled service, reflecting her husband's status, not her own desires. However, another perspective, often championed by feminist historians, explores the agency of the painted woman. They argue that by openly embracing makeup, these women were, in a way, rejecting the restrictive norms of domesticity. The actress, with her painted face, was a public figure, a professional who earned her own living. Her makeup was part of her professional identity, a tool of her trade that gave her a form of economic independence unavailable to most women. In this light, the painted face can be seen not as a mark of shame, but as a defiant symbol of female presence in the public sphere. A rejection of the expectation that a woman should be a private, domestic angel. You, of course, are firmly on the angel side of the divide. As you prepare to leave your room, you give your face one last check in the mirror. Is there any hint of powder? Is the blush too strong? The fear of being mistaken for a painted woman is a powerful motivator. Your entire social standing rests on maintaining this delicate balance. Your beauty is a testament to your virtue, and that virtue is defined, in large part, by what it is not. It is not loud, it is not bold, and it is, above all, not painted. The line between you and the woman on the street is as fine and as clear as a single, misplaced smudge of rouge. You are finally ready. It's been hours. Hours of washing in cold water, of being cinched and squeezed, of applying toxic lotions, of building a heavy, elaborate crown of hair, of encasing yourself in layers of fabric and bone. You stand before the full-length mirror, a complete and perfect specimen of Victorian femininity. But as you gaze at your reflection, let's take a moment to conduct a final, silent audit of the cost. Not the financial cost, but the physical one. This is your body's silent protest, the accumulated damage of a lifetime spent in pursuit of this ideal. Let's start from the top. Your scalp is aching under the weight and tension of your hairstyle. The constant pulling has weakened the hair follicles, and you may be experiencing some hair loss, particularly around the hairline, a condition known as traction alopecia. The chronic headaches are just a normal part of your week. Your eyes, swimming in their belladonna-induced haze, are strained and sensitive. Your long-term risk of glaucoma is elevated, but that's a problem for the distant future. In the present, you just have to cope with blurry vision and the discomfort of bright lights. Your skin, your prized pale canvas, is in a state of quiet crisis. The lead-based powder is slowly poisoning your nervous system. The mercury lotion is steadily destroying the very cells you're trying to perfect. The skin itself is becoming dry, discolored, and prematurely aged, a problem that you will solve tomorrow by applying more of the same poisons. You are caught in a destructive loop, treating the symptoms of your cure with more of the cure itself. Moving down, we come to your torso, the epicenter of the assault. Your lungs, compressed by the corset, have a diminished capacity. You are perpetually short of breath, which makes you more susceptible to the respiratory illnesses that haunt the smog-filled city air. Your diaphragm is restricted, your breathing shallow. Your internal organs are in a state of constant, unnatural compression. Your liver is being squeezed, your stomach pushed upward, leading to chronic indigestion and acid reflux. Your intestines are displaced, contributing to the constipation that is a common, if unspoken, ailment among your peers. The long-term effects on your digestive and reproductive health are a ticking time bomb. Your skeleton itself is being subtly reshaped. Your lower ribs are likely bent inward from years of tight lacing. Your spine, which should be a strong, flexible column, is instead held in a rigid, unnatural posture. The muscles of your back and abdomen, deprived of their function, have weakened and atrophied, making you almost completely dependent on the very device that caused the weakness. To go without your corset now would feel like your body might simply collapse. Your feet, crammed into narrow, pointed shoes, are a landscape of hidden pain. Bunions deform your joints, and corns burn on your toes. Walking any significant distance is an ordeal, which is fine, because a lady of your station is not expected to walk much anyway. Your limited mobility is a sign of your social success. This litany of ailments, the headaches, the poor vision, the damaged skin, the shortness of breath, the indigestion, the back pain, the aching feet were so common among upper and middle class women that it was often seen as the natural state of the female body. It was simply the price of being a woman, of being delicate. The collection of symptoms even had a name, neurasthenia. Doctors would diagnose women with this vague condition, characterized by fatigue, anxiety, and a host of physical complaints, without necessarily connecting it directly to the corset, the poisons, and the crushing weight of the beauty standards themselves. Here's one last, sad, and bizarre fact: the swoon. The fashionable fainting spell was a real phenomenon, but it wasn't just an affectation. It was the logical outcome of this systemic abuse, a combination of restricted breathing, displaced organs, no blood sugar from not being able to eat properly, and the sheer physical stress of it. All could easily lead to a woman losing consciousness, especially in a hot, crowded room. The fainting couch wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a necessary piece of medical equipment for a generation of women who were slowly being suffocated by their clothes. The academic debate here is stop. Was this a conscious, systemic effort by a patriarchal society to weaken and control women by physically incapacitating them, or was it a case of a tyranny of fashion? An aesthetic ideal that spun out of control, with women as both its primary victims and its most ardent participants. Historians who support the first viewpoint to the way these standards rendered women physically helpless, dependent, and perpetually in a state of beautiful sickness, making them easier to confine to the domestic sphere. Others argue that this attributes too much sinister, conscious intent to what was a more complex cultural phenomenon. They argue that women were not simply passive victims but were actively engaging with these fashions to navigate their social world. They saw the ideal as beautiful and desirable and were willing to pay the physical price for the social and personal rewards it brought. The pain was not the goal, but an accepted cost of doing business in the high-stakes marriage market and social hierarchy. You look at your reflection. This perfect, painful creation. You have successfully erased almost every sign of a healthy, functioning, natural body. You have replaced it with an artificial ideal. Your body is protesting in a dozen silent ways, but the world will only see the beautiful result. It will see the angel in the house, serene and perfect, and it will applaud your dedication. The silent scream of your own biology is drowned out by the rustle of your silk dress. You stand there for a moment longer, a prisoner in the beautiful armor you spent all morning constructing. But history, like fashion, does not stand still. Even as you represent the pinnacle of this restrictive ideal, the seeds of its destruction are being sown, not in the parlors and ballrooms, but out on the dusty roads and tennis courts. As the 19th century draws to a close, a new figure begins to emerge on the cultural landscape: the new woman. She is a product of social and economic change. More women are gaining access to higher education. More are entering the workforce, not just as factory hands or maids, but as teachers, typists, and telephone operators. They are fighting for the right to vote. And this new, more active and independent woman requires a new, more practical way of dressing. The single greatest agent of change, the machine that did more to liberate women from the tyranny of the corset and bustle than any single feminist writer, was the bicycle. The safety bicycle, with its 2 wheels of equal size and chain-driven mechanism, became a massive craze in the 1890s. And suddenly, women wanted to ride. You can ride a bicycle in a full crinoline or a projecting bustle. You can't pedal effectively while laced into a corset that restricts your breathing to shallow gasps. The bicycle demanded freedom of movement. And so, fashions began to adapt. Skirts became shorter, rising to the ankle for the first time in centuries. The bustle disappeared, replaced by a simpler, A-line gold skirt that was full at the hem but narrow at the hips. And most controversially, some daring female cyclists began to wear bloomers full, baggy trousers gathered at the knee, worn under a shorter skirt. This was utterly scandalous to mainstream society. Women in trousers. It was seen as a usurpation of male privilege, a shocking rejection of traditional femininity. The bloomer girls were ridiculed in the press and sometimes harassed on the streets. But they persisted. They were choosing mobility over propriety. Alongside cycling, other sports became popular for women. Tennis, golf, and swimming all required less restrictive clothing. The heavy, bound corset began to give way to simpler, more flexible girdles or for some radical women, was abandoned altogether. The ideal silhouette began to change, moving away from the artificial hourglass towards a more natural, athletic form. The new woman also had a different attitude towards health and beauty. The pale, consumptive look began to fall out of fashion. A healthy glow, a sign of time spent outdoors cycling or playing tennis, started to become fashionable. The Gibson Girl, the iconic creation of American illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, became the new beauty ideal at the turn of the century. She was tall, athletic, and confident. Her hair was still coiled high, but in a looser, more casual style. She was elegant, but she was also active and engaged with the world. She was no one's delicate, fainting angel. Here's a small, telling detail about this shift, the change in cosmetics. While makeup was still not fully respectable, the first modern beauty companies, like that of Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden, were founded in the early 20th century. They began to market cosmetics not as secretive, poisonous cures, but as tools for rational self-improvement, part of a scientific approach to beauty that emphasized health and hygiene. The language was changing from hiding flaws to enhancing assets. The historical debate around this transition is, of course, rich. Was the decline of the corset a victory of feminism and dress reform, or was it simply the fashion industry creating a new ideal to sell a new set of products? The answer is likely a combination of both. The tireless work of dress reformers and suffragettes certainly laid the ideological groundwork for change. They had been arguing for decades that women's clothing was unhealthy and impractical. But it was the bicycle that provided the catalyst, the popular movement that made their arguments mainstream. Fashion, in the end, followed function. Some historians also argue that the shift wasn't as revolutionary as it seemed. They point out that while the corset may have gone, it was replaced by other restrictive undergarments like girdles. The pressure to conform to a specific body shape didn't disappear, it just changed form. The focus shifted from a tiny waist to a slim, boyish figure in the 1920s, which brought its own set of anxieties and restrictive practices. Like breast-flattening brassieres, the cage may have changed, but the impulse to shape the female body to a fashionable ideal remained. As you stand in your drawing room, the world of the new woman is still just a whisper on the horizon. You are the old world, the world of hollowbone and arsenic, of fainting couches and hidden pains. You are a perfect, beautiful monument to an ideal of beauty that is as cruel as it is captivating. But your time is coming to an end. The sound you hear in the distance, that faint ringing of a bicycle bell, is a death knell for the angel in the house. A new century is dawning, and it will demand a new woman to meet it. For now, though, the party's about to start. You take one last look in the mirror, take a shallow breath, and turn to make your grand entrance, a perfect relic of a beautiful, terrible age. And so, your long day is over. The performance has concluded. The heavy dress and the cage of a corset have been removed, piece by painful piece. The dozens of pins have been plucked from your scalp, and your hair, finally released, tumbles down over your shoulders, a cascade of relief. You've washed the lead and the mercury from your skin, and for a few hours, your body is, once again, your own. As you slip into your simple cotton nightgown, the silence of the room feels like a comfort. The moonlight filters through the tall window, casting long, soft shadows on the floor. The world outside has gone quiet, the clatter of carriages on cobblestones fading into a distant memory. You can feel the gentle rise and fall of your own chest. A deep, full breath that was impossible just a few hours ago. It feels like the greatest luxury in the world. You drift into sleep, and the rigid lines of your day begin to soften and blur. The sharp pinch of the corset melts away. The weight of your head dissolves into the pillow. The faces and voices from the party fade into a gentle hum, a background noise to your descent into rest. You are floating now, untethered from the strictures of hollow bone in the judgment of watchful eyes. In this space, your body is not a project to be managed. but a vessel for dreams. The ideal you strive for all day no longer matters here. There are no mirrors in this quiet, peaceful dark. There is only the soft weight of your blankets, the steady beat of your own heart, and the slow, easy rhythm of your breathing, carrying you further and further away, into the soft, forgiving landscape of sleep. The end of the article. Good night.